Chapter 1322. Spirit was also a form of energy. Due to the two subsystems in her mental brain domain, Jiang Pingji rarely used it on a large scale. She wanted to prevent her mental strength from being empty and giving the subsystems a chance to stir up trouble. Usually, she strictly controlled the range of her spirit and only covered 100 meters around her. If outsiders stepped into the range of her mental domain, she would be able to discover their existence. It was an excellent means of warning. In the future Federation, it was extremely difficult for outsiders to assassinate a master with a strong mental brain domain because they could not avoid the first warning line. Of course, if the killer was also a master with a strong brain domain and extremely precise mental control, there was still a chance of success. However, Jiang Pingji had yet to encounter one. In the past, the range of Jiang Pingji's mental coverage was at least a radius of 10,000 meters. Now, who could snipe her from 10,000 meters away? A radius of 100 meters was enough, and it could be used all day long. Out of caution, when she arrived with her troops, she used her spirit to check carefully. As long as the duration was short, the consumption of her spirit was not great. Soon after, she found thousands of people hiding in the deep mountains. What were these people doing? It was easy to figure it out. According to normal people's thinking, the troops attacking at night must have come from the camp. Therefore, keeping an eye on the enemy's camp could determine the timing of the enemy's attack. As soon as they moved, the scouts would sound the alarm. Who would have thought that Huang Song would send troops to hide in the mountains early in the morning? Because they knew that Jiang Pingji would not choose to camp in the mountains, the traces of this group of people would not be exposed. What time is it now? Jiang Pingji stood up and picked up the god-slaying sword on the mat. She asked the soldiers guarding outside in a clear voice. "My lord, it's 1:15 midnight." Jiang Pingji calculated the time and strode out of the main tent. "Send someone to inform them immediately that the enemy is coming. The northeast side of the main camp is on alert." Jiang Pingji did not use the camera in the streaming room. Although using the camera would not consume her own mental strength, the field of view was limited. Once there was an obstacle, there would be a blind spot in some places. In contrast, Jiang Pingji's mental strength was omnipresent. The soldier was stunned for a moment, as if he was surprised how Jiang Pingji knew this news. "Yes." The guard immediately ran out. The rest of the people stood in place and guarded the main tent loyally. Jiang Pingji whistled. Little White, who was sleeping nearby, seemed to feel it. It woke up and snorted, then ran toward her. At the same time, the enemy's thousands of troops were ready for battle. In order to reduce their movements, the horses' hooves were wrapped in dried grass, and the horses' mouths were also covered. When the appointed time arrived, a black shadow ran over like a ghost. The other party lowered his voice and said, "General, everything is ready." "What's the situation in the enemy's camp?" The man said, "The patrols are still tight, but the tents have not been set up yet. The northeast direction is the best place to break through." The hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the camp were connected to each other, stretching for dozens of miles. This was a huge project. Even with so many people working together, building a proper camp was not something that could be completed in a day. Jiang Pingji's camp was still half finished. The soldiers in charge of logistics were working overtime to build it. The encampment was the first line of defense. If the basic line of defense was not built, it would be easy for the enemy to launch a sneak attack. Gather the troops and set off. The night was dark, and the campfire in the distance lit up the camp like the brightest pearl in the night. In ancient times, the conditions for a night attack were harsh. Because the people were malnourished, the prevalence of night blindness was extremely high. Huang Song took great pains to select these thousands of people. The night was dark, but they could still see the road clearly. They sneaked all the way to the enemy's camp. They thought they were being careful, but they did not know that everything was under Jiang Pingji's control. The camera in the streaming room had a visual angle, but her spirit did not. She clearly saw the thousands of people split into two groups and sneaked out of the camp. The enemy was right under her nose, but Jiang Pingji still had the mood to joke. "Wenbin, don't you think this is like what happened in Shanwu City?" Han Yu was stunned. It took him a while to understand what Jiang Pingji was referring to. During the Battle of Shanwu City, Han Yu took advantage of the blind spot of the deserters to secretly send out the men to attack at night. If Jiang Pingji's martial arts were not so good, maybe Xie Zhe's night attack would have been successful. Once she died, the crisis in Shanwu City would be solved. Han Yu smiled. "You think it's similar, my lord?" Jiang Pingji said sincerely, "But Bogeo's is not as good as yours." Jiang Pingji really did not notice Han Yu's sneak attack. Her usual alert range was either 100 meters or covered the whole camp. It rarely extended beyond the camp. Because the larger the alert range, the longer it lasted, the heavier the burden on her and the easier it was for the system to play tricks. Han Yu said, "You flatter me, my lord. I don't deserve it." His lord was very stingy, but she was also very magnanimous. If an ordinary person were to talk about how they had suffered a setback, they would definitely feel uncomfortable. But Jiang Pingji was different. She not only took the initiative to mention it, but she also used it to tease others. She did not hold a grudge at all. Han Yu was not used to it. He was shocked by her at first and thought she was going to settle scores with him. As they were talking, the enemy had already sneaked out of the northeast camp. Because the watchtower had not been built yet, the alert range of the camp was limited. However, if they were closer, they would be easily discovered. Jiang Pingji suddenly said, "They're coming." As soon as she finished speaking, the enemy's arrows flew over the crude wooden fence of the camp. The arrows rained down from the sky. For a moment, there were several screams in the camp. It was creepy. Because Jiang Pingji had asked them to be alert, the soldiers nearby immediately reacted after the wave of arrows. They sounded the alarm and organized to defend against the enemy. The enemy also rushed in at this time. Hundreds of armored horses broke through the paper-made wooden fence. Without the wooden fence, the enemy followed closely behind and successfully rushed into the camp. The archers lit up the fire arrows. Kill, enemy attack. The movement quickly spread to the whole camp. Like a pot of boiling hot water, the whole camp was alarmed. The enemy came aggressively, like a hot knife cutting through butter. They rushed in all the way, but they soon found something was wrong. The soldiers under Jiang Pingji's tent reacted too quickly. The fierce momentum seemed to have hit an iron plate and suddenly slowed down. The enemy appeared one after another, and the soldiers from both sides were in a mess. "Oh no! We've been tricked." Such a swift reaction speed was a clear indication that the enemy was well prepared. Chapter 1323. General, the enemy is already prepared, what do we do now? Seeing that the number of enemies was increasing, their charge was met with a strong obstacle, and it was difficult for them to advance. Instead, they were being suppressed by the enemy. Seeing this situation, the general in charge of the sneak attack was so angry that his eyes turned red, but the weapon in his hand never stopped, and blood dyed the ground. Fight and retreat. He was one of the few generals under Huang Song's command who did not come from the Yuanshi family. He was extremely decisive. Seeing that the enemy had already set up an ambush, he decisively chose to give up. However, he did not order his soldiers to turn and run. Instead, he ordered them to retreat in an orderly manner. As long as they could retreat before the enemy reinforcements arrived, it would not be a problem to preserve most of their forces. Although Jiang Pingji had more people on her side, she couldn't block them all at once. Of course, if the battle dragged on for too long, the soldiers under Jiang Pingji's command could exhaust them to death. Time was running out, and the enemy was closing in on them. The sneak attack soldiers couldn't help but feel despair as they faced the endless stream of enemies. Jiang Pingji was the first to notice the situation on the battlefield. She raised her eyebrows when she saw the general retreat decisively. There were many talents under Huang Song's command, but for some reason, they were not valued. As a result, many of them were not famous. Not to mention anything else, this person's ability to judge the situation was much better than Yuan Xian's. However, my place is not a hotel. How can you come and go as you please? Jiang Pingji laughed and gave Little White an order. Little White changed its meek behavior and galloped toward the northeast. The sneak attack came very suddenly. Even with Jiang Pingji's early warning, casualties were inevitable in a battle between two armies. When Jiang Pingji arrived on Little White's back, the area within 200 feet of the northeast barracks was a mess. Weapons and arrows were scattered everywhere. Corpses of both sides were lying on the ground. Fresh blood soaked the soil, and a strong smell of blood wafted in the hot and stuffy air. Jiang Pingji was cold. Without saying a word, she carried the god-slaying sword and joined the chaotic battle. The blade was like the black and white ghosts of impermanence's magic weapon that could reap souls. With one slash, she killed a person. She and Little White had worked together for many years, and their teamwork was excellent. She would slash while Little White would charge and trample. Master Xianxia was in charge of the northeast barracks. When he saw that his lord was also present, he was so scared that his heart almost went out on strike. Jiang Pingji gently swung the god-slaying saber. Fresh blood splattered on the ground, leaving a long trail. The tainted blood faded from the blade, and it became clean and shiny again. Yongu, gather some soldiers and follow me. Xianxia held back countless words of ridicule in his heart, but what he blurted out was, "This general obeys your order." He turned around and called for a group of soldiers and horses, gathering more than 1,000 elites at the fastest speed. Although Xianxia did not have night blindness, his night vision was only at the level of an ordinary person. He wasn't blind, but he still couldn't see clearly a few feet away. He also knew how dangerous it was to fight at night. If they were not careful, they could easily be killed by the enemy. How could the Lord not understand this? Everyone keep up. My lord, you can just leave the task of chasing after the thieves to me. Why do you need to take the risk yourself? Xianxia never thought that there would be a day when he would worry about his lord stealing his job. My lord is brave and good at fighting. As a general, I am deeply ashamed. They're cutting off their tail in order to survive. They're abandoning a portion of their troops to hold up the rear while the vanguard takes the opportunity to pull away. Now that the night is dark, as long as they can open up a distance of 30 to 40 feet, it will be even harder to catch up with them, Jiang Pingji said. Keep up, don't lose them. Day was different from night. A person's field of vision was limited. The enemy only had to worry about running forward, but the pursuing troops had to consider many aspects. Jiang Pingji was very clear that even if Xianxia led the troops to chase after them, he would at most bring back 100 or 200 corpses. The real big shots would be firing the cannons. Xianxia said, "My lord, the wilderness is dangerous and unpredictable." "You'd better," Jiang Pingji said, "your eyes aren't good. If I let you chase after them, the enemy will be long gone." Xianxia was speechless. Jiang Pingji's night vision was extremely strong. Even if this body was Lu Shi's, her night vision was still better than that of an ordinary person. Besides, no matter how fast the enemy ran, could they be faster than her mental strength? As long as they were within the range of her mental strength, she could find the enemy's position at any time. Soon, Xianxia understood why his lord said that their eyes weren't good. The soldiers chasing after the enemy lost them, but Jiang Pingji confidently pointed out the enemy's direction. 2 points in a line, they headed straight for it. Not long after, Xianxia heard the enemy's movements. Jiang Pingji took down the bow and arrows on the horse's back as she rode. She knocked an arrow and drew the bow to a full moon in one breath. Several arrows left the bowstring and flew. The arrowhead seemed to have eyes and accurately hit the backs of several people. They were suddenly ambushed. The bodies of the enemy soldiers who were hit by the arrows fell forward due to inertia. They faced the ground, their faces smashing into the ground and dragging some distance. Their companions nearby heard the movement and immediately knew that their pursuers were nearby. They were horrified. "General, the enemy has caught up." The sound of horse hooves behind them made them panic. They had finally shaken off their pursuers, but why did they come after them again? The general said, "Based on the enemy's movements, I think there aren't many pursuers. We can fight." Jiang Pingji rode Little White and charged for several feet. When dozens more people died under her sword, she acutely noticed that the enemy in front of her had stopped running and was about to get into formation to fight against them. She curled the corners of her lips and revealed a bloodthirsty smile. She raised her hand and waved her sword, accurately hitting down the stray arrows that were shot at her. She raised her sword high. Kill! Thousands of feet away from the northeast camp, the two armies collided and launched a swift and violent charge. Jiang Pingji happily harvested heads. It was really hard on Xie, who was worried about her. He was afraid that his lord would be injured if he made a mistake. She's simply a lunatic. The enemy's general's face was ashen. How could he have imagined that Jiang Pingji would dare to run out of the camp with 1,000 or 2,000 people and chase after and intercept them? It would be fine if it was during the day, but visibility was obstructed at night. It was very easy to lose sight of the enemy and encounter unknown dangers. Jiang Pingji was like a hothead, but she still caught up with them with great precision. Of course, at that moment, he still did not know that the lunatic and hothead he mentioned were Huang Song's mortal enemies in this battle. The two armies fought and quickly rushed into a mess. It was like two different colored waves colliding with each other, merging and mixing with each other. In a chaotic battle, it was easy to accidentally injure one's own side, but Jiang Pingji did not have this concern. She killed a child with one slash of her sword. Sometimes she could even kill a group of them with one slash. Xie could only bitterly follow his lord with his trusted subordinates. Wherever his lord went, he would go and help her clean up the small fries. He did this to protect Jiang Pingji, but it also exposed her position. The enemy did not know Jiang Pingji's identity, but someone who could be protected by so many soldiers must be a big fish. Unknowingly, Jiang Pingji steadily pulled the aggro. Even though the enemies came one after another, no one could hurt her. The battle lasted for more than an hour. Jiang Pingji steadily won the title of best of the match. Xie panted and shook his hands. Chapter 1324. Inhuman. Was she still human? For more than an hour, she continuously brandished her sword and killed people. Didn't the lord's hands feel tired? He saw clearly that his lord did not reduce the frequency of her attacks from beginning to end. She even fended off the enemy's sneak attacks. No matter how sharp the lord's sword was, it required a lot of strength to cut through flesh and bones. How many people did the lord kill that night? How many times did she brandish her sword? Xie did not know the exact number, but he could roughly estimate that it was a number that made his hands tremble. This was simply not something a human could do. Xie suddenly thought of the sneak attack in Shanxing. He was the main general in charge of the sneak attack, but he failed at the last moment. Before he failed, he still wanted to fight with all his might and kill Jiang Pingji at the cost of his life. Now, it seemed that the other party had indeed shown mercy. Not to mention this life, even if he sacrificed 10 lives, Xie did not think he could kill the other party. "My lord, we have captured more than 10 captives." Xie resisted the urge to complain and obediently went to deal with the aftermath for Jiang Pingji. The enemy had suffered heavy casualties. Xie raised his torch and looked around. He was almost dumbfounded by what he saw. Under normal circumstances, in a battle between two armies, the proportion of people dying on the spot was not high. Most of the soldiers died because they could not receive medical attention. Xie thought that he could capture many wounded soldiers. He did not expect that only a few of the enemies lying on the ground were alive. Most of them were dead. He looked carefully and realized that the way the enemy soldiers died was very similar. Either their necks were cut off or their vital parts were accurately shot. Almost all of their injuries were enough to meet the king of hell on the spot. Even if Daoist came, he would not be able to save them. Seeing this, he inhaled a breath of cold air. Xie thought that his martial arts skills were not bad. When he sparred with Li Yun on a daily basis, the chances of winning were 50-50. Even so, he did not dare to say that he could end the enemy's life with one shot. It was not difficult to kill a person, but it was difficult to kill them all. His lord had done it. The problem was that she was his lord, not a general who charged and broke through enemy lines. His lord was the backbone of the overall situation. The strategists gave advice and suggestions for his lord. The generals attacked cities and conquered territories for his lord. The three parties had a clear division of labor. In the end, as a military general, Xie was ruthlessly crushed by his lord in the field that she was good at and trampled on over and over. Could Xie say that he was always worried about losing his job? Even though there were countless things he wanted to complain about in his heart, Xieze looked very serious and calm on the surface, giving people a feeling that he was exceptionally reliable. Jiang Pengji was sitting on the stool, the god-slaying sword casually inserted into the ground beside her feet. When she heard Xieze's voice, she raised her head and looked at him. There are still living captives? Xieze, sure enough, his lord was killing with every slash. It was obvious that she didn't want the enemy to live. Jiang Pengji raised her hand to wipe off the blood. Even though she was full of energy, the warm-up had made her sweat. Her sweat mixed with the enemy's blood almost smeared her face. Take them back and lock them up. Jiang Pengji sniffled, a look of disgust appearing in her eyes. She raised her hand and wiped it on her armor, then used a relatively dry part to wipe the blood off her face. The feeling of blood on her skin was truly unbearable. Right, we can also interrogate him. It would be good if we can get some information about Bogeo. If we can't, lock him up until the end of the war. Xieze cupped his fists and said, "Understood." Jiang Pengji asked, "Right, did you catch any of the enemy's generals?" Xieze turned around and waved his hand. Immediately, soldiers brought over 2 people who were tied up like palm sticks. The 2 were not far from Jiang Pengji. Most generals had good hearing, so they clearly heard the conversation between Jiang Pengji and Xieze. The most important thing was how Xieze addressed Jiang Pengji. He called her lord. What did that mean? The 2 of them looked beet red, their gazes dull. Even the large and small wounds on their bodies could not distract them. Who knew that the rumored Duke of Lanting would personally lead troops and chase after the enemy troops in the middle of the night? If they had known that Jiang Pengji was such a suicidal person, they would have sent all their troops and only had eyes and hearts for Jiang Pengji. These 3 words were enough to kill her. Jiang Pengji casually glanced at the 2 of them and smiled warmly. "Are you under Bogeo's command?" The 2 of them were silent. It wasn't that they had never seen Jiang Pengji before. Back then, Jiang Pengji and Huang Song had joined forces to attack Meng Zhan of Cangzhou. The troops under the 2 camps had even spent the New Year together. It was nighttime now, and they were so far away. Who could recognize Jiang Pengji's blood-stained face? Not to mention them, even her mother couldn't recognize her. One of them stiffened his neck and said, "If you want to kill me or dismember me, just do as you please. Why waste your breath?" Jiang Pengji actually nodded and said, "What you said makes sense. Keeping the 2 of you alive would be a waste of my military rations. After all, we don't have enough rations. 2 more people means 2 more mouths to feed. However, I love peace and don't like to kill," she smiled, revealing a set of neat white teeth. The surrounding atmosphere became eerily silent. Xieze could not help but turn around and cover his face. His lord said that she loved peace and didn't like to kill. Even if he could go against his conscience to say that, he wouldn't recognize the corpses of the enemy troops lying on the ground. Did he feel guilty saying that? The 2 captives were also shocked by Jiang Pengji's actions. For a moment, they did not know how to respond. In short, there was no way to complain. As they spoke, the sound of horses' hooves could be heard from afar. Their eyes lit up, but they soon dimmed again. The people who came were not Huang Song's troops. They were all there to support Jiang Pengji. "My lord," Jiang Pengji said, "the matter here has been settled. Send someone to clean up the battlefield. Dispose of the corpses that need to be disposed of. Don't keep them." The corpses of the enemy soldiers were burned and buried on the spot. The corpses of their own soldiers could be left with an urn for their souls to return to their hometown in the future. She waved her hand and jumped onto the back of the little white horse. Drowsiness overwhelmed her, and she couldn't help but yawn. Jiang Pengji's work and rest schedule had always been regular. After working hard for most of the night, she was more or less sleepy. She led the troops back to the camp. She asked someone to prepare a bucket of clean water for her to wash off the dirty blood on her body. She washed herself clean and slept. After the war, Han Yu and Wei Ci could work overtime. She was in charge of recuperating and building up her energy. After exercising, she bathed and slept. The quality of her sleep was exceptionally good. Huang Song's side was not so comfortable. Tonight's night attack had been planned for a long time. It was a sneak attack to pull back the fallen morale. He waited anxiously in the main tent. He did not sleep all night. His heart sank even more when the sky turned bright. Report. Just as he was feeling disheartened, there was movement outside. Huang Song's spirits were lifted. Tell me quickly. How's the battle situation? The messenger said dejectedly, the enemy has been on guard for a long time. Our troops could not retreat in time and were entangled by the enemy. Huang Song took 2 steps back in disbelief. If his right hand was not supporting himself on the table, he would have lost his composure. Chapter 1325. Before the sneak attack, Huang Song had been mentally prepared for the possibility of failure. When the reality was right in front of him, he couldn't accept it. He was mentally prepared, but he didn't expect to lose so thoroughly. He had sent out thousands of troops, but only 200 or so returned safely. The rest were either killed in battle or captured by the enemy. How could they fight this war? Huang Song felt that he needed some time alone. When everyone heard the result of the meeting, they immediately fell silent. They lowered their heads and didn't dare to look up at Huang Song's face. They had high expectations for the sneak attack. They didn't expect the enemy to know in advance and have already made preparations. This was really unexpected. Huang Song wasn't someone who would admit defeat easily. He said, "Does anyone have any other good ideas?" The group of people discussed until dawn. They were especially tired. After all, they were all awakened from their beds by Huang Song's men. Cheng Jing looked normal, but he was actually a little tired. After the meeting, he returned to his tent. Before he had time to wash up, a report came from outside. His heart skipped a beat. He mistakenly thought that it was his lord Huang Song calling for him. He said, "Who's outside?" As soon as he finished speaking, an unfamiliar male voice came from outside. The other party's elegant words had a Hu County accent. Cheng Jing vaguely guessed the other party's identity. He said in a low voice, "Come in." The person was a man dressed in a dark brown scholar's robe. To make it easier for him to move, this person's wide sleeves were tied up with wrist guards. He looked less elegant and refined, but more agile and valiant. This person exchanged a few words with Cheng Jing. Cheng Jing invited him to take a seat. The other party was a little cautious and sat down with slight awkwardness. As intelligent as Cheng Jing was, he naturally guessed the purpose of this person's visit. As expected, the other party stiffly changed the topic to last night's sneak attack. At present, not many people knew about the situation of the battle. This person in front of him belonged to this group. He had come this time to find out more information. Cheng Jing calmly stated the result. The person's eyes widened as if he couldn't believe the result. How could it be?" the other party stammered. A lot of sweat appeared on his forehead, and his eyes flickered. Cheng Jing said, "Victory and defeat are common in war. Isn't it normal for the enemy to be one step ahead?" The other party laughed dryly in response to Cheng Jing's words, but his heart was beating like a drum. He could not help but be nervous and afraid. If Huang Song lost, he would definitely be punished by Jiang Pingji. Based on Jiang Pingji's deeds in the past few years, this woman could be said to be magnanimous, but in some aspects, she was exceptionally petty. She could even be said to seek revenge for the smallest grievance. Cheng Jing's eyes were like an ancient well, calm and tranquil. He saw through the thoughts of this person with a single glance and laughed coldly in his heart. "Sir, are you worried that my master will not be able to defeat Lu Shi?" Cheng Jing's sudden question scared the man so much that his heart almost stopped beating. He was like a frightened cat whose fur was standing on end. How could this be? The other party raised his hand to wipe the sweat off his forehead and said sheepishly, "Although Lu Shi is famous, my lord is not weaker than him." The outcome of the battle had yet to be decided, so it was still too early to make a judgment. How could I dare to boost other people's morale and diminish my lord's prestige? Cheng Jing snorted coldly and declined to comment. He was extremely disgusted with two-faced people, and the person in front of him was one of them. This person was born in Jianghe County and had lived there for generations. He had used many underhanded methods to obtain exorbitant profits. The fertile land in Xianxia County had been occupied by his family and a few other families. Almost all the local people were cheap tenants under their control. They even secretly engaged in illegal human trafficking. Before Lu Shi went to Hu County, these families were the local tyrants of Xianxia County. The people lived in poverty and could not see any hope. After Lu Shi took over Hu County, these local tyrants were slowly subdued and suppressed by him. They behaved themselves for a while. Previously, when Jiang Pingji pretended to be sick, they heard rumors that she did not have long to live. Their hearts were alive again. Coincidentally, Huang Song had sent someone to persuade them to rebel. This group of people took advantage of the situation and directly betrayed Jiang Pingji. As a result, Xianxia County was lost. They waited and waited, burning 3 jia sticks a day, hoping that Jiang Pingji would quickly kneel down. Unexpectedly, she recovered from her illness. Not only did she recover from her illness, but the situation on the battlefield slowly favored her. Huang Song was also forced to abandon Qinzhou and retreat from Xianxia County. If they had known that Jiang Pingji's life was so tenacious, they would not have sided with Huang Song so decisively. They would have at least watched for a while longer. It was too late to say anything now. They only hoped that Huang Song could turn defeat into victory and turn the tables. However, this seemed to be an extravagant hope. Cheng Jing said, "If there is nothing else, please make yourself at home." It was obvious that he wanted to chase them away. The man looked embarrassed. He knew that he was not welcomed by Cheng Jing. He had no choice but to bow and leave. Cheng Jing did not like him, not only because he was two-faced, but also because he did not have the slightest bit of self-awareness. Could he not see what kind of person he was? To Huang Song, they were just tools that could be thrown away after he was done using them. However, they thought too highly of themselves and overestimated themselves. Cheng Jing furrowed his brows and called someone over. He instructed, "Send someone to keep an eye on them. Report to me immediately if there is any movement." For such people, Cheng Jing did not expect them to have such things as loyalty. Even at this critical juncture, they did not forget to sound out the situation. It was obvious what kind of people they were. They had sided with Huang Song because of Lu Shi's decline. Who knew if they would betray Huang Song for the same reason? In the face of profit, all moral principles could be put aside. Yes, Cheng Jing was right. This person really had the intention of jumping ship. Huang Song's ship was about to sink. Of course, they had to think of a way to save themselves. How could they save themselves? They had to think of a way. This is not very good, is it? After all, we betrayed Lu Shi. Now we have to betray Huang Song. Will Lu Shi accept this? What's not good about it? Those who achieve great things don't bother with trifles. As long as we can make a great contribution to Lu Shi, even if Lu Shi does not put us in an important position, he will not be able to settle old scores. The man rolled his eyes and said impatiently, "Huang Song has lost thousands of troops this time. He only has Haozhou left. What do you think his chances of winning against Lu Shi are? It is obvious that he will lose. I'm afraid it will be difficult to salvage the situation." In troubled times, moral principles were even cheaper than feces in a cesspit. Feces could nourish the soil, so what was the use of moral principles? There was no lack of loyal and unyielding people in the world, but these people were too arrogant and few would go along with others. Most of them were opportunists. As long as they offered enough benefits, Lu Shi would be tempted. His companion was still hesitant. He sighed. "Alas, what should we do? If we had known this would happen, we wouldn't have thought about it." After all the twists and turns, they still had to go to Jiang Pingji's camp. They had wasted so much effort. What's the use of saying this now? Finding a way out as soon as possible is the right way. Once Huang Song is defeated, we won't be able to get anything out of it. Chapter 1326. On Huang Song's side, people's hearts were wavering and the clouds were treacherous. On Jiang Pingji's side, it was in full swing. Of course, it was the others who were in full swing. She woke up naturally and stretched on the bed. The weather was getting colder, and the seal on the blanket was getting stronger. It took her a lot of effort to push away the clingy little demon. She changed, washed up, and started streaming. A new day had begun. Today is also a day full of vitality. In the streaming room, the salted fish noticed that Jiang Pingji was in a particularly good mood. Her smile was brighter than the clear sky outside. When the streamer marries, did the streamer pick up money today? What you said just now makes me suspect that you've been transported. Haitang Shuangzhe, could it be that the long-cherished wish of the streamer has finally come true? Has the streamer finally given up on platonic love and pushed a certain guy? With that said, everyone really felt that the streamer was particularly refreshed today. After Jiang Pingji finished her breakfast, she picked her teeth with a bamboo stick. Her actions looked particularly unrestrained and unrestrained. Her brows relaxed, and she mysteriously flirted with the salted fish audience. There was indeed a fierce battle last night. The situation was unprecedentedly intense. The enemy couldn't withstand the impact and was defeated like a landslide. The audience sent naughty bullet screens such as, "Yo yo yo, my streamer is amazing, and let me borrow a phone to talk." To do Feiqiu, how fierce was the battle? Jiang Pingji said, blood splattered everywhere. Gui kai guo fengxiu, where's the enemy? Where is the enemy now? Jiang Pingji smiled and said, they abandoned their helmets and armor and were utterly defeated. They were exhausted last night and are still recuperating. The group of seasoned salted fish all revealed the same mysterious smile. Their streamer was really bold and unrestrained. Lao Ciji Lianmeng, let me say something. Streamer, you have to be gentler to others. Don't be too violent. Kaidian, I've been heartbroken twice on the same day. I have to bless you with tears in my eyes. Yewu Yenling, TSK, something doesn't feel right. According to the streamer's temper, it's impossible for her to publicize such a thing. The streaming room was in a mess. The salted fish audience all wailed about their heartbreak. The power of the army of heartbreakers was great. The news that Jiang Pingji had finally pushed a certain guy to his heart's content immediately hit the headlines. Because the fan base was too large, they didn't even manage to refresh twice before they awkwardly realized that the server had crashed due to them. Programmer, you're blaming me? Jiang Pingji was teasing the salted fish with a smile when she acutely sensed movement outside. She hurriedly sat up straight and looked serious. My lord, this is the account for last night's battle. Wei Ci and the rest finished working overnight. Jiang Pingji had just woken up when she delivered the results of the night's work. It included the number of casualties and various losses. The latter was to be recorded in the general ledger, while the former was to be distributed after the war. How many people died in a war? Depending on the degree of death, injury, and disability, the level of compensation and benefits would be different. One could imagine how heavy the workload was. These were things that Wei Ci would be busy with in the future, but he had no regrets. Back then, when Jiang Pingji entrusted him with the heavy responsibility of compensating the bereaved after the war, he knew how heavy the burden was. Jiang Pingji took a closer look. The number of casualties and losses were within her acceptable range. Compared to her loss, Huang Song's heart should be trembling with heartache, right? She called the others over and inquired in detail about the construction progress of the camp. It wasn't a detailed matter, but she grasped the key points steadily. The others didn't dare to skimp, so their efficiency was naturally high. Han Yu said, Huang Song failed in his sneak attack last night. He probably won't mobilize his troops in the next 2 days. If he doesn't move, I will, Jiang Pingji said. War is different from other things. It's best to end the battle quickly. Once winter came, it would be difficult to fight a war. The soldiers' winter clothing was also a huge expense. Han Yu asked, My lord, do you want to initiate the attack? Jiang Pingji nodded. She didn't want to fight a protracted war with Huang Song. This year, Hu County had lost 70% to 80% of its grain production. The loss made her heartache. In order to avoid financial problems, she could only think of ways to save money. Han Yu said, That's good. Our army can take advantage of Huang Song's low morale. Jiang Pingji also inquired about the training of the troops. Xie Zhe and the others didn't dare to delay and told her everything in detail. When she was done, it was time for lunch. Smoke rose from the back of the camp, and the air was filled with the fragrance of rice. The idle spectators who witnessed everything were speechless. They finally realized that they had been tricked by Jiang Pingji. Lao Siji Lianmeng, streamer, you've opened my eyes. What happened to the intense battle with blood splattering everywhere? What happened to the enemy abandoning their helmets and armor and being utterly defeated? They had wanted to talk in private before, but they never expected that the veteran players would still fail in the hands of the streamer. Cultivation, #doghead, the streamer is still as naughty as ever. Are you happy being naughty? It was clearly Huang Song who ambushed her and was beaten back by her. They didn't expect her to make it sound so vague and ambiguous, leading the veteran players to fail miserably. Fukadujuo, I feel sorry for the programmers of Weibo and the servers that died unjustly. Weibo has crashed all morning. They died unjustly. Jiang Pingji spread her hands and shrugged. Was it her fault? The benevolent saw benevolence, and the wicked saw filth. What she said was the truth. Who asked them to misunderstand? Jiang Pingji smiled as she looked at the streaming room that had failed miserably. Her already radiant mood rose by a notch. Perhaps the heavens couldn't stand it anymore and found someone to make things difficult for her. Jiang Pingji sneered as she listened to the whole thing. She asked the people around her meaningfully. Are they trying to disgust Bogeo, or are they trying to disgust me? The people who had betrayed her had actually turned over a new leaf. They had even sent people to secretly express goodwill to her, hinting that they could assist her in eradicating Huang Song. She had seen thick-skinned people, but she had never seen anyone so thick-skinned. Sorry, in her case, there was no turning back for the prodigal son. There was only death. Yang Si furrowed his brows and said, could it be that Huang Song sent them to feign surrender? Jiang Pingji said, Bogeo knows my temperament. He wouldn't do such a stupid thing. Even if he wanted to feign surrender, he definitely wouldn't choose these people. She and Huang Song had also been friends of scoundrels for a while. They had a good time together. Although they hadn't confided in each other, Huang Song was a meticulous person. He had an accurate understanding of others. She didn't believe that Huang Song didn't know how she treated traitors. Yang Si revealed a look of disgust. In that case, this is their own idea? Jiang Pingji said, this is a group of short-sighted idiots. When they saw that Jiang Pingji was seriously ill, they thought that she couldn't make it, so they turned to Huang Song. Now that Huang Song had failed, they felt that Huang Song couldn't make it. They were anxious to turn to her. Yang Si rolled his eyes and laughed. How does my lord intend to deal with these people? There's no harm in. Make use of them, then throw them away after using them? There's no harm in doing so. Jiang Pingji said, I'm not so incompetent that I need these useless people to deal with Bogeo. They don't even know what kind of people they are. Do they really think that they're rare commodities and that they can pick and choose among the feudal lords? Yang Si saw that Jiang Pingji was angry, so he didn't say anything. Han Yu asked, then what does my lord mean? Jiang Pingji sneered. Chapter 1327. Since Jiang Pingji, the god of slaughter, had spoken, Yang Si, Han Yu, and the others couldn't stop her. Yang Si was better. He had followed Jiang Pingji for some years. He knew his lord's temperament very well. Han Yu wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. After the meeting, Yang Si approached Han Yu and said, why do you look like you have something on your mind? Han Yu glanced at Yang Si and didn't say anything. His expression was cold and distant. Ordinary people would have left, but Yang Si was different. He came up to Han Yu. He said, are you worried that my lord will lure those people here and kill them? Han Yu finally opened his mouth and said slowly, it's not good for my lord's reputation. Yang Si said, some people are like this. They want their reputation but lose it. If they want their reputation, they have to suffer for it. Only our aides worry about my lord's reputation. She doesn't care about it at all. Zi Shao has been busy all these years. I've never seen him relax the storytelling team that he built up. Who else could it be for? Isn't it all for my lord? Zi Shao is probably the most tired one for my lord to have such a good reputation. But my lord is capricious. She's not the only one who's unhappy. She can make a whole family unhappy. Han Yu said in a low voice, "From what you said, you have a lot of complaints about my lord?" Xianxia laughed. "You're really a bad person. Are you trying to get information out of me?" Han Yu said coldly, "A gentleman doesn't avoid the beauty of others and doesn't talk about their evil. Don't measure the heart of a gentleman with your own mean measure." Xianxia wasn't angry. Han Yu's temperament was like that. He was so honest that he wanted to be beaten up. The point was that Xianxia couldn't beat him. Xianxia said, "It's not that I have complaints about my lord. People have thousands of temperaments. It's rare to meet a lord who is straightforward and not stupid. I just said that to tell you that my lord doesn't care so much about her reputation. She really wants to kill you." Speaking of their lord, she was also a very strange person. If one were to say that she was honest, she was sometimes glib-tongued. If one were to say that she was unrestrained, she would never bend when it was time for her to be upright. If one were to say that she was stingy, she would be willing to part with her wealth. If one were to say that she was magnanimous, if someone betrayed her once, she would want to kill that person. There were thousands of languages in the world, but Xianxia couldn't think of any words that could accurately describe his lord, let alone define her. It was probably because of this that she was able to get along well with everyone. Qiguan Rang was cautious. He only used 70% of his strength in everything and left himself some leeway. However, he did not hold back in front of his lord. Feng Jin was born in an aristocratic family and was the precious son of a noble family. No matter how good the Feng family's upbringing was, he was born with an air of nobility that separated him from others. In the end, this flower of the rich and powerful world was willing to submit to her master and help him with all her might. It had to be said that she was very capable. Feng Zhen and Wei Ci were each other's best friends. One was a playboy, while the other was an upright and elegant gentleman. Two completely different styles, yet they could get along harmoniously. However, it did not mean that the two of them could get along with the same master. In the end, the master did it. In the face of this situation, there was only one word in Xiaxi's mind: all rivers run into the sea. Han Yu frowned. He was angry but powerless. "You can't indulge the lord like this. Do you really think you're raising a daughter?" Xianxia laughed and said, "What a coincidence. Feng Longzi asked the same question a few years ago." Han Yu was speechless. Did he really raise her as his own daughter? Xianxia expressed that there was nothing wrong with this. After all, the lord also treated them as the public's favorite. The relationship between the lord and her subjects was very harmonious. "My lord's reputation is more important." Han Yu's heart wavered, but his mouth was still firm. Xianxia said casually, "The lord can do what she wants to do. Isn't it our duty to clean up after her?" To put it bluntly, she was an old maid who cleaned up messes. Han Yu said, "What do you mean?" Xianxia said, "It doesn't matter what lord does. What's important is what we should do after she's done." If their lord's reputation was really hurt, shouldn't they think of a way to reverse it? She couldn't possibly be worried that she wouldn't be able to protect her lord's reputation and deal with the aftermath, so she stopped her actions and regulated her behavior. Han Yu was speechless. He finally understood how the lord's unruly temper came about. It was all because of these people's indulgence. Han Yu had a belly full of bitterness, but in the end he had to fall into the mire with Xianxia. While Jiang Pingji was sharpening her knife, the pitiful fence-sitters still didn't know what was going on. Instead, they were delighted by Jiang Pingji's deliberately ambiguous attitude. However, they didn't dare to make any moves. After all, they were still in Huang Song's territory. They also needed to find an opportunity to show their role. Little did they know that what they thought was flawless was all in Cheng Jing's eyes. Cheng Jing was furious and directly informed Huang Song of the matter. Huang Song was silent for a long time. His eyebrows looked gloomy under the flickering candlelight. "My lord, this matter," Cheng Jing was a little hesitant. It would be fine if Huang Song directly got angry, but he didn't react at all, which was worrying. Huang Song said, "Yumo, thank you for telling me about this. Otherwise, I'm afraid I would have been kept in the dark." Cheng Jing said, Those two-faced villains are not worthy of your grief, my lord. Grief? Huang Song smiled. I'm not grieving over this. On the contrary, I feel pity for them and their brains. Cheng Jing was surprised. Huang Song said, Lanting hates people who betray her the most, not to mention people who betray her repeatedly. Cheng Jing hesitated. According to those people, she seems to have the intention to accept them. This isn't like her. She doesn't have the tolerance to accept people who have betrayed her. Huang Song shook his head. If she really did accept them, it wouldn't be her. Do you still remember that when Lanting first entered Chongzhou, her father, Lu Zhongqing, wanted to matchmake her with the aristocrats of Chongzhou, but because a few people didn't know what was good for them and rashly humiliated her, she vented her anger on the entire family without saying a word. She's not a person who will compromise for the sake of benefits. Anyone with a discerning eye would know that Jiang Pengji feigned civility with the aristocrats of Chongzhou. If she built a good relationship with them, she would even get help from them. What happened in the end? To put it bluntly, she couldn't stand being wronged. She could make others feel wronged, but if others made her feel wronged, she could punch them to death. She could be indifferent to the great benefits of Chongzhou, let alone others? Cheng Jing asked, My lord, do you mean that she has other plans? There's no harm in fulfilling their wishes. We can also take advantage of the situation and make use of them. Huang Song's eyes darkened and he sneered. Fulfill their wishes and give them some confidential information so that they can happily come to Lanting and claim credit. If Lanting sincerely accepts them, she'll fall into our trap. If she has other plans, it's just as well. We can use her to clean up the family. Such villains are indeed an eyesore. Chapter 1328. Cheng Jing sighed. This kind of person is not worthy of my lord's anger. Just leave this matter to me. Huang Song's expression was still not good. Even though the person who betrayed him was a fence-sitter, he still minded and was unusually angry. However, with Cheng Jing's persuasion, Huang Song calmed down a little. With a calm expression, he said, I'll leave this matter to Yumo. Cheng Jing bowed and replied, Yes. Courting death was not scary. What he was afraid of was being hated by both Jiang Pengji and Huang Song at the same time. Although Cheng Jing always acted like a gentleman, being a gentleman did not mean that he was honest and inflexible. If he really schemed against someone, the other party would willingly help him count the money after being betrayed by him. In the words of the livestream viewers, which of these think tanks and strategists did not cut the black and white? Which fat fish did not take the bait when they acted as bait? Others thought that they had taken advantage of the situation and succeeded in their scheme, but they did not know that the other party was secretly watching the show. Not long after Cheng Jing's scheme, the fat fish took the bait. Is this news true? Of course it's true. The person who spoke was the man who had visited Cheng Jing earlier. His companion was still a little worried and felt that the document in his hand was a little hot. Then tell me the details in detail. Cheng Jing is also an old fox. How could he be so careless as to let you steal this? The man said, Listen to me in detail. It turned out that Cheng Jing felt embarrassed when he forcefully sent him away. Yesterday, he met him and invited him to sit in his tent for a while. The two of them had not exchanged greetings for long when Cheng Jing received the battle document sent by Huang Song. He hid the document in the bedroom behind the tent. At that moment, because of the dry weather and the soldiers' carelessness, sparks from the bonfire splashed onto the tent and caused a fire, burning several tents nearby. Cheng Jing thought that the document had been burned, but he did not know that the man had taken advantage of the chaos to steal all of them. This fire came too coincidentally. His companion still had doubts in his heart. The man said, What's so strange about this? It's not uncommon for a camp to catch fire. Do you think this is a trap? His companion hesitated and said, It looks like it. Although autumn was dry and there was a lot of withered grass, making it easy for the tents to catch fire, the timing made him a little suspicious. The man said, Cheng Jing was almost burned by the fire. A small part of his left hand was burnt. If the soldiers hadn't put out the fire in time, he would have died. If this was really a trap, what was Cheng Jing plotting? He would have sent people to capture us long ago. Why would he play the trick of injuring himself to gain our confidence? His companion said, "It's not unreasonable to say that if Qing Jing had set up a trap, it meant that Huang Song already knew that they had the intention to rebel. How could he not do anything? Now that he thought about it, he must have been thinking too much." His companion asked, "Then what do we do now?" The man said, "To avoid any undue delay, we naturally have to pass the news to Lu Shi before Huang Song mobilizes his troops. Only then can we seize the opportunity to make meritorious service." Although the battle document was confidential, it had a time limit. They had to act before the document became invalid. His companions were a little worried. If they really betrayed Huang Song, and they continued to stay here with Huang Song, they would lose their lives. He told the man what he was worried about, and the two of them came up with a plan to escape to Lu Shi that very night. There were a total of 5 powerful families that sought refuge in Jianghe district. The 5 families were connected by marriage, and their interests were already inseparable. Naturally, they had to act together. They immediately split up to discuss with a few others. Finally, they decided to escape at midnight that night. Qing Jing had long been watching them. Naturally, he would arrange for informants, so every word of their conversation fell into Qing Jing's ears. He snorted coldly and said, "They don't know that their death is near." The camp occupied a large area, and the personnel were complicated. If they had trusted subordinates as spies, it would not be difficult to disguise themselves as ordinary soldiers and sneak out. Qing Jing specially opened the back door for them, so their escape was exceptionally smooth. Jiang Pingji had even prepared backup for them. Seeing backup, the few of them instantly felt relieved. Although they did not show it on their faces, they felt a little proud. Although they had betrayed Jiang Pingji, now that they had returned, she still accepted them generously. How could they not feel proud? From another perspective, they could also see how important this confidential document was. They had secrets in their hands, and the weight of the secret was equivalent to the weight of their own. When they arrived at the camp, the sky was still gloomy, but their moods were incomparably radiant. From afar, they could vaguely see countless tents prostrating on the ground. Truly stepping into Jiang Pingji's territory, they felt extremely at ease. Little did they know that the god-slaying sword in Jiang Pingji's hand was already thirsty. "Where is the Lord now?" one of them asked the soldier who was waiting for them. The soldier replied respectfully, "It's still early. The Lord should be training the troops at the training ground. Please wait for a while." They did not suspect anything. One by one, they waited in the main tent for Jiang Pingji's arrival. Even if they did not know how to read the situation, they did not dare to complain. After all, the situation was stronger than they were. If Jiang Pingji asked them to wait, they had to wait. What was Jiang Pingji doing now? Just as the soldier had said, she was warming up and training the troops at the training ground. As the Lord, how could she convince the warriors and make them loyal to her? Apart from having a charismatic personality, her fists had to be strong. To make them respect her at all times, Jiang Pingji went there every few days. This made life difficult for Qin Gong and the others. Jiang Pingji occasionally beat up the newly promoted newcomers. Most of the time, she looked for them to fight one-on-one or gang up on them. Although she had a sense of propriety and would not embarrass them, it was a pain in the ass to be completely suppressed by the Lord. Others would still think that the two of them were evenly matched. As a result, the old generals did not like to spar with Jiang Pingji. When they saw her at the training ground, they looked bitter. Qin Gong, Xie, and the others had not learned their lesson. They were eager to try. When they could not avoid her, Jiang Pingji would stop for a while. "What? They're here?" Jiang Pingji was wiping the sweat on her neck with a cloth. She looked refreshed. On the other hand, Qin Gong and the others looked as if they had been plucked by a demon. "I'll go over now. You guys continue training." The first sentence was directed at the soldier who sent the message. The second sentence was directed at Qin Gong and the others. Jiang Pingji left. The two who had escaped heaved a long sigh of relief. Jiang Pingji strode into the main tent. She did not even look at the few people. She sat upright in the main seat and held the god-slaying sword in front of her. With such an attitude, not to mention being courteous, it could not even be considered friendly. Xianxia said, "Your Highness, these are brought by these gentlemen. Please have a look." He held Huang Song's battle document in front of Jiang Pingji with both hands. She picked it up with one hand and opened it with a swoosh. She read through it quickly. Jiang Pingji's attitude was a mystery. The few people's optimistic moods sank. They held their breaths and waited for her reaction. After a while, Chapter 1329. Their hearts skipped a beat. They were so scared that their faces turned ashen. Fake surrender? Where did that come from? They were sincerely betraying Huang Song and pledging allegiance to Jiang Pingji. For a moment, fear and grievance filled their hearts, but they could not care less. They hurriedly explained to Jiang Pingji. "Why did you say that, Master Lanting? We are sincerely surrendering." "Sincerely? TSK, then your sincerity is really cheap," Jiang Pingji said. "Are you really stupid or are you pretending to be? Do you really think I'm an ignorant woman in the backyard? This so-called document is obviously fake. Do you really think I'll take the bait so easily?" Jiang Pingji's tone was very calm, but when it fell into people's ears, they felt a heavy weight pressing on their hearts. It was frightening. They were so scared that their faces turned pale. One of them immediately bent down to pick up the document on the ground. He read it carefully from beginning to end. No matter how they looked at it, the document was real. There were no flaws. Why did Jiang Pingji say it was fake? They did not know that she did not need to guess to know that it was fake. Her understanding of Huang Song was much deeper than Huang Song's understanding of her. It was impossible for the people in front of her to gain Huang Song's trust. The possibility of them getting the so-called confidential document was also very small. If secrets could be obtained so easily, why would they fight a war? They could just play spy games. Even if the document was real, Jiang Pingji did not intend to use it. The more critical the situation, the more calm one had to be. Even if Huang Song was like a grasshopper at the end of autumn, Jiang Pingji would not underestimate her enemy. Instead of believing in a secret letter whose authenticity was unknown, it was better to sit still and watch Huang Song reveal his fatal weakness in his impatience. She was not anxious. It was Huang Song who was anxious. Putting that aside, Jiang Pingji also needed an honorable reason to kill the people in front of her. Wasn't fake surrender a good excuse? As long as she insisted that the document was fake and that these people were enemies sent by Huang Song to fake surrender, wouldn't she have a reason to kill them? Although they did not know Jiang Pingji's plan, they were aware of the danger they were in. They were so scared that they broke out in a cold sweat. "How dare I belittle you, Duke Lanting?" They had looked down on them in the past, but Jiang Pingji's fists were tough. She made them swallow back all the words that they wanted to say. "Huang Song, my son, is selfish and treats his subordinates harshly. The Yuans are rampant and domineering, and we have suffered greatly. I've heard that the Duke of Lanting is a man of great righteousness and has the appearance of a truly wise ruler. That's why we're willing to forsake the darkness and seek the light." This letter truly belongs to Huang Song. This person spoke with righteousness and awe-inspiring righteousness. If he was given a background, it would definitely be a bright and clear universe, a clear sky and bright sun. Jiang Pingji laughed. The audience in the streaming room was also in an uproar. Not last night's stars. What the hell? How shameless were these people? Fusha Rua Xiaomeng. This is totally refreshing. These people betrayed the host, didn't they? What a disgusting face. Being two-faced wasn't scary. What was scary was that the other party still had the courage to defend themselves. Even the word, shameless, wasn't enough to describe what they looked like. Fu Feng Jiling. I feel even more sorry for Huang Song, my baby. This group of people picked up their bowls to eat, then put them down to curse. That's enough. They surrendered to Huang Song willingly. Now that they've expelled Huang Song, they're still slandering him. This operation is simply too awesome. Fat done for you, Tiski. Two completely different faces. I've really learned something new. The audience had been following the streaming room for nearly 10 years. They'd seen all kinds of ancient people from Jiang Pingji's perspective. There were so many characters, but almost none of them were as disgusting as these people. They were obviously good-looking and had rather frightening appearances, but the way they ate was so unsightly. Jiang Pingji also sneered. I can't accept these compliments. When you betrayed me in Zhanghe district in Hu County, did you also say the same thing to Bogeo? You speak in human language when you see a ghost, and you speak in human language when you see a ghost. You have a sharp tongue, and your foundation in flattery is very deep. When they heard Jiang Pingji's words, they knew that she wouldn't believe them. Not only would she not believe them, but they would also be in trouble. As expected, Jiang Pingji said to the people outside the tent, "Guards." As soon as she finished speaking, the soldiers entered in a line. Before they could resist, they locked their hands behind their backs. I've been wronged, Lord Lanting. I've been wronged. I've been wronged. I really didn't have any ulterior motives when I surrendered this time. Lord Lanting, please understand. My loyalty to you can be witnessed by the sun and the moon. I've been wronged, I've been wronged. Seeing such a situation, how could they still maintain their dignity? They immediately began to cry out their grievances. Every word was shouted out loud. Jiang Pingji knew that they were wronged, but that wasn't important. This kind of capricious villain was a scourge if left alive. He might stab her again someday. It was better to kill him to prevent future troubles. Jiang Pingji sneered. Take them all away. After beheading them, hang their heads outside the camp for Bogeo to have a good look. When they heard this, they struggled even more fiercely. The soldiers were not to be trifled with. Their palms were broad and powerful. They clamped them firmly like iron pincers, making it impossible for them to break free. Jiang Pingji glanced at the god-slaying sword. Her eyelids drooped slightly. These traitors were not worthy enough for her to draw her sword. Not long after, a few screams came from outside the tent. The heavy heads fell to the ground and rolled twice. Blood splattered on the ground and dyed the soil. Reporting, my lord. They've been beheaded. Jiang Pingji said, hang them. Remember to wash their faces so that the enemy can see them clearly. At noon, Huang Song received the news. He laughed bitterly and said, Lanting still has an old temper. She killed them just like that. Cheng Jing was also surprised by Huang Song's understanding of Jiang Pingji. They were on opposing sides, but the lord still addressed her by her first name. About? Was this considered a form of love-hate relationship? Then, should we still set up an ambush? Huang Song said, Lanting has most likely seen through that the document is fake. It's useless to set up an ambush. Instead, we'll make a fool of ourselves. Cheng Jing said, if that's the case, we can only make other plans. Before the sky had completely darkened, there was a commotion outside the camp. Reporting to my lord, the enemy outside the camp has issued a letter of challenge. Huang Song hurriedly took the letter of challenge. The handwriting on it was Jiang Pingji's. The content was in accordance with her usual style, sharp and domineering. Once again he gathered everyone for a discussion. This letter of challenge caused even more waves. Lanting has stated that the two armies will have a decisive battle. Does anyone have a countermeasure? Everyone looked at each other. If the two armies confronted each other head-on, it would be a direct confrontation. The number of our troops is inferior to the enemy. If we confront each other now, it will be extremely disadvantageous for us. Someone said sarcastically, the two armies haven't even fought yet, but they're already praising the enemy. Chapter 1330. Lanshui Yuyu. Awesome, my streamer. So there really was a letter of challenge in ancient times. Xingyue and Yun, that's not the point. The point is that my mind is filled with Zhuge Liang sent a letter of challenge to us for a decisive battle tomorrow. How should we fight the enemy? Am I overthinking it, or have I logged too much on Bilibili? I'm looking forward to the streamer and Huang Song quarreling in front of the battlefield. In this season, the days were short and the nights were long. The sky darkened early. Before the end of the broadcast, it was already dark outside. The battle would begin the next day. Jiang Pingji took her time tonight. Her slender fingers played with the bean-sized candlelight. No one knew what she was thinking. Unbeknownst to her, outsiders thought that Jiang Pingji was daydreaming, but she was actually investigating the surrounding environment. Because Huang Song's battle was very important, Jiang Pingji did not dare to take it lightly. She did not give Huang Song a chance to sneak an attack. Almost every day, she had to spread out her mental strength to investigate the enemy within 100 miles. There was no progress before, but today there was a different discovery. She furrowed her brows in deep thought. As she withdrew her mental strength, she guessed the origin of the troops. Tomorrow was the decisive battle. She did not want to be attacked by an unknown enemy halfway through the battle. Jiang Pingji shouted to the outside, "Quickly summon the generals. Tell them that I have something important to discuss." She suddenly shouted. Qin Gong and the others naturally rushed over without even taking off their armors. Tomorrow's decisive battle. Jiang Pingji glanced at the few of them and pointed to two newly promoted newcomers. The profession of a general was obtained through military merits. Not only did it require a certain amount of luck, but it also required a stage to perform. Jiang Pingji was quite generous in this aspect. This was also one of the reasons for the internal unity. She then said to Xieze, "Yuange, you will lead the troops to guard the rear tomorrow." Xieze originally thought that there would be some people, but he was dumbfounded when he heard this. But why was he the one guarding the rear? Xieze was the vanguard general. Logically, he should be the vanguard. She changed her mind at the last minute and transferred him to the rear. He plucked up the courage to ask. Jiang Pingji also gave him a reason. Jiang Pingji said seriously, "I just received a secret report. There will be changes in the battlefield tomorrow. I asked you to guard the rear out of consideration as a whole." Xieze nodded his head and stepped out to receive the order. He returned to his original valiant and high-spirited attitude, as if he could raise his spear and kill the enemy right now. Qin Gong was younger than Xieze, but he definitely had more experience on the battlefield than Xieze, so he was naturally more sensitive. There's a change in the battlefield tomorrow? Could it be that Huang Song still has some tricks up his sleeves? I'm not sure yet. We'll know tomorrow, Jiang Pingji said. Yuan Gui, you must guard the rear well. Don't let your guard down. Even though there were very few generals under her command who thought they were smart and made decisions on their own, those who were young and famous were always more impetuous. They were eager to perform meritorious deeds, so it was inevitable that they would drop the ball at critical moments. Jiang Pingji had to remind them from time to time to prevent them from being hot-blooded. Generals were a profession where their heads were tied to their waistbands. If their brains weren't good, how long could they live? After a round of discussion, Jiang Pingji closed the streaming room, washed up, and went to bed. She needed to rejuvenate herself. There would be a big battle the next day. At the same time, the troops led by Feng Ju were resting at a place dozens of miles away. The scouts sent out had also gotten a clear understanding of the situation at the front lines. Knowing that the decisive battle between his lord and Jiang Pingji had yet to begin, Feng Ju heaved a long sigh of relief. He had finally made it in time. A general hesitantly asked Feng Ju, "Military counselor, should we rush over to meet up with our lord tonight, or?" Feng Ju shook his head and said thoughtfully, "If we rush over tonight, most of our troops will be exhausted. They won't have much combat power left. How can we help our lord tomorrow? It's better to let the army rest for a while. When the two armies face off tomorrow, you and I will lead the troops to launch a sneak attack from behind while Lu Shi is lax. We'll take her by surprise and attack her when she's unprepared. This will definitely cause Lu Shi to panic. In this way, the pressure on our lord's side will be reduced." Feng Ju withdrew his troops from the front lines. In order to confuse Qiguanrang, he specially led his troops to take a detour to mislead Qiguanrang, making him think that he was not rushing to the front lines but had sent his troops back to reinforce Haozhou. In other words, Jiang Pingji did not know that Feng Ju's troops had already arrived. In this way, Jiang Pingji would be defenseless when Feng Ju launched a sneak attack from behind tomorrow. How could they know that Jiang Pingji was different from them? She had long noticed Feng Ju's actions. The next day, the sky was dimly lit and the morning sun shone faintly. The troops of the two armies confronted each other in the cold wind. Banners fluttered in the wind, and the battlefield was filled with a somber atmosphere. The banners with the word Lu or Hong written on them fluttered in the wind, making a loud sound. The swords and spears flashed with cold light, reflecting the resolute faces of their owners. The morale of the troops was twisted into a ball. The murderous aura of the military formation filled the sky, and even the air was cold. Under such an atmosphere, the salted fish in the streaming room did not dare to joke. Jiang Pingji was dressed in red clothes and silver armor. Her red tassel helmet covered most of her face, but it could not hide the undercurrent that surged in her eyes. Behind her, the troops wore bright armor and were in high spirits. Their morale had reached its peak. In the face of such a lineup, it was impossible for Huang Song's side to not feel pressured. However, he had no way out. Huang Song closed his eyes and opened them again. His eyes were calm. If it was in the past, fighting a war had to follow procedures. Nowadays, it was more and more casual. Fighting a war was fighting a war. Huang Song was not foolish enough to suggest a battle between generals. He knew that Jiang Pingji's martial strength alone was enough to challenge everyone, regardless of whether it was one-on-one, or a group fight. Under such circumstances, the troops of the two sides seemed to have no other activities other than fighting. They could not possibly let more than 200,000 people watch their lord chat in front of the battlefield, could they? Beat the drums. At the command, the drummers pushed out hundreds of war chariots with big cowhide drums. Dun, dun, dun. The sound of the war drums boosted the morale of the whole army. Jiang Pingji also raised her hand and waved, indicating that the war drums could begin. The military formations stretched for several miles. The two armies added up to more than 200,000 troops and horses. They had to rely on this method to transmit all kinds of information. The beating of the drums was not only to boost morale, but also to inform the troops. Everyone perked up. Those who were absent-minded came back to their senses. Those who were sleepy woke up. The big battle was about to begin. Jiang Pingji was the commander-in-chief for this battle. Although Luo Yue was capable, he had been squatting in the rear to deal with security and border defense all year round. He did not have much actual experience in commanding troops. Regarding this, Luo Yue was not the least bit unwilling. If the Lord commanded the troops, it meant that she could not act recklessly. Qin Gong and the others rubbed their palms together. Every one of them was in high spirits. Without waiting for Jiang Pingji to give the order, the enemy troops could not hold back anymore. Shouts of "kill" resounded through the sky, causing pain in one's ears. The soldiers who carried the flags waved the flags. It was as if black clouds were floating in the sky. The soldiers who beat the drums worked even harder. Because they used all their strength to beat the drums, the muscles on their arms tightened. One arm was as thick as an ordinary person's thigh. Their oily sweat soaked their skin until it glistened. Jiang Pingji smiled, drew her sword, and gave the order. Chapter 1331. The cavalry played a pivotal role on the battlefield. Without large-scale popularization or further development of firearms, the myth of the cavalry was almost unbreakable. It was not that the cavalry could not be dealt with, but the price paid was far greater than the gains. This was also the horror of the cavalry. The cavalry was extremely mobile. Whether it was a joint attack or a roundabout retreat, how could the two-legged people outrun the four-legged horses? Their ability to collide and kill was also one of the cornerstones of the cavalry myth. In addition, ancient wars were very dependent on military formations, which could be integrated into a whole, thus achieving a sublimation from quantitative change to qualitative change. Not only could the cavalry collide and cut the military formation, but it could also prevent the enemy from being able to form an effective defense or attack. Jiang Pingji's cavalry not only consisted of light cavalry, but also heavy cavalry that had defeated the northern borderline. One light cavalry and one heavy cavalry cooperated with each other. Whether it was an attack or something else, the effect was naturally stronger than that of a single unit. Huang Song attached so much importance to her that he naturally knew this. In order to deal with this terrifying cavalry battalion, he discussed with everyone for a long time and finally came up with a way to slightly restrain them. They adopted a more flexible and changeable military formation. At the same time, they avoided the sharp edge and lured the enemy into the formation, then strangled them. The cavalry that ran were wolves and tigers. The cavalry that fell into the swamp of the sea of people were lambs waiting to be slaughtered. Their ability was limited. In order not to let the enemy discover that there was something fishy about the military formation, Huang Song and the others also made some changes to the vanguard. This method was no problem for ordinary people, but for Jiang Pingji, it was superfluous. Not to mention her own spiritual ability, even the high-altitude camera in the streaming room could overlook the situation from a certain angle. She keenly discovered the characteristics of Huang Song's military formation and gave another order. The messenger received the order and immediately sent the message out. The rhythm of the bugle horn and military drums suddenly changed. At that moment, the heavy cavalry had already resisted the tide-like rain of arrows and was less than 100 feet away from the enemy's front line. Such a short distance was just a blink of an eye for the warhorses that were running at full speed. The soldiers on horseback heard the order to change. They pulled the reins tightly to direct the warhorses to change direction while they raised their thick shields and smashed the charging enemy heavily. The enemy used a joint attack technique to stab the warhorses under the cavalry. Even though the warhorses were wearing thick armor, they still neighed in pain. The heavy cavalry under Jiang Pingji burned a lot of money. The weight of the men and horses could be called human-shaped tanks. Along the way, it was the most violent and powerful suppression. That kind of strength was not something that an ordinary body of flesh and blood could withstand. They broke through in an instant, but they didn't go straight in. Instead, they charged towards the flanks of the enemy in a wide arc. It was even simpler for the light cavalry. After receiving the order, they immediately split into several groups and circled around to the enemy's flanks. From the looks of it, the cavalry is afraid? The soldiers under Huang Song's tent did not know what was going on. Only Huang Song and his men, who had been paying close attention to the battlefield, were shocked. The cavalry wasn't scared. They knew that there was a trap in front of them, so they didn't want to make unnecessary sacrifices. Instead, they decided to attack the two flanks where the defense was weaker. When Qing Jing thought of this possibility, he secretly clenched his fists. At the same time, he was in disbelief. His opponent's reaction was too fast. Compared to Qing Jing's calmness, Huang Song's reaction was much more obvious. Huang Song murmured, "Lanting, oh Lanting, you're really my nemesis." Even though his heart was heavy, Huang Song did not reveal a dejected expression. He was the Lord. If he panicked, what would happen to his subordinates? Because the cavalry didn't really affect the enemy's main force, when the two armies collided, the situation of the battle could be said to be tragic. Jiang Pingji looked at the situation on the battlefield. She suppressed the urge to join the battle. Instead, she calmly commanded the dispatches and reinforcements. Watching from afar, Han Yu couldn't help but sigh. "My lord really has the demeanor of a brave general." Yang Si added, "My lord also has the wisdom of a strategist." Fortunately, there was only one lord like this. If there were a few more, wouldn't the strategists and generals lose their jobs and be laid off? At the same time, Wei Si had a solemn look on his face. He knew that the balance of the battlefield was slowly tilting towards his lord. However, Feng Ju, who was under Huang Song's tent, still hadn't appeared. This made him a little worried for no reason. Wei Si would not underestimate anyone who had lived in troubled times. After all, Feng Ju was an important minister who had once assisted His Majesty. While he was deep in thought, the front line was already in a mess. Not long after, there were corpses lying on the ground. The battle cries of the two sides not only resounded in the sky, but even the gravel on the ground trembled slightly. Luo Yu was in charge of the left wing, Qin Gong was the vanguard, and the right wing was led by Jiang Nongqin, who was newly promoted. Both sides infiltrated each other and fought each other. If not for the difference in clothes, they really wouldn't be able to tell who was the enemy. Someone had just killed the enemy with 1 foot, and then his body was pierced through by the enemy's weapon. Xianxia seemed very calm, but his eyes kept drifting in a certain direction. In fact, even if he sat on horseback, this altitude was not enough to cross over the wall of people, but he could not help but want to see. It didn't matter in the past, but after clarifying his intentions, he felt that there was nothing more torturous than the combination of civil and military. What was a general? It was a precarious profession, and the battlefield was so chaotic that even immortals could be accidentally injured. Sigh, how worrisome. Han Yu rolled his eyes, glanced at him and asked, "What are you worried about?" "The situation is favorable to our army." "What are you worried about?" Xianxia said, "You don't understand. This is concern." Han Yu sneered, "My son Han Run has been studying at the Golden Scale Academy for a long time. A single man who didn't even have a wife mocked him for not knowing how to care for his wife and daughter? Who gave him the courage?" Xianxia, "Perhaps it was the Lord?" Han Yu didn't have much contact with Jiang Nongqin, but he knew that she was unusually quiet. Although she was a woman, she was no less than an ordinary general. To be honest, in his opinion, Xianxia was a rotten piece of wood, and he really couldn't afford to be associated with her. If Xianxia knew about this, he would definitely explode in anger and draw his sword to hack Han Yu. Jiang Nongqin was leading the right wing to deal with the enemy. Because of her prestige in the army over the years, the generals under the Lord's command didn't dare to look down on her, not to mention those ordinary generals who had been promoted. No one dared to protest or question her orders, so the situation on the right wing was relatively stable, and it was difficult for the enemy to expand their victory. On the one hand, she cooperated with the Middle Army to contain the enemy, and on the other hand, she joined forces with the Middle Army to make the enemy suffer. Looking at her like this, who wouldn't give her a thumbs up? They were not convinced by women, except for two exceptions. One was the unfathomable Lord, and the other was the dignified Captain Jiang. Although Jiang Nongqin was an old woman, there were many people who secretly liked her, but they just didn't have the guts to say it out. "Captain Jiang, there is a change in the rear." Chapter 1332. The battle at the front was in full swing, and Xieze was so bored that he was almost moldy. However, military orders had to be obeyed. Even if there was nothing wrong, Xieze still had to be alert and be extremely vigilant. "Have the scouts we sent out returned?" Xieze paid attention to the battle situation at the front and ordered the soldiers to be ready for battle. Reporting to General, "There is no news yet." The deputy general pressed the sword at his waist with his left hand and looked at the front solemnly. He asked Xieze in a low voice, "General, why did the Lord send the general? Huang Song's troops are not as good as ours. He has already used up all his troops. How could he have the strength to launch a sneak attack?" For a general, there was no future without military merits. How did military merits come about? Naturally, they were piled up with the enemy's heads. Hiding in the safer rear, they didn't even see the shadow of the enemy. Wasn't this a waste of time? Their lord's future was getting brighter and brighter. Once Huang Song was destroyed, she would be the ruler of all of Dongqing. It was a small peak of her life. They didn't know what the future would be. Did the Lord want to establish a stable country or continue to expand? If it was the latter, it would be best. If it was the former, one less battle meant one less chance to be promoted. When the world was at peace, it would not be so easy for a general to be promoted. This time, being sent to the rear was equivalent to being on a cold bench. The deputy general who assisted Xieze was naturally worried. "This is the Lord's order. We will follow it. She must have a reason for this arrangement. Let everyone be alert so that the enemy doesn't take advantage of any loopholes." Compared to the deputy general's worry, Xieze was calm. He raised his hand and took out a handkerchief from his armor to wipe the shiny shaft. He lowered his eyes and said, "If there is any trouble at the rear, the Lord will punish us. Neither you nor I can afford to bear the consequences." The deputy general thought of his lord's temper and suddenly sweated profusely. Of all the people he questioned the Lord's orders? "I will do it now." The deputy general immediately left. Xieze recalled the deputy general's words and frowned slightly. Although he was not the Lord's die-hard fan, the Lord made decisions like a god and rarely made mistakes. The Lord said that the enemy might launch a sneak attack at the rear, so this news was most likely true. The only problem was, when would the enemy appear? The rear was too comfortable and the soldiers were more or less relaxed. This was not a good sign. Xianxia could only send someone to constantly remind the soldiers in his tent not to be careless. Report. Just as the deputy general was about to report to Xianxia, he heard a shout in his ear. What happened? The person said, "We found a bloodied warhorse just now." The deputy general was shocked and quickly said, "Let's go and take a look." It was a maroon warhorse. Its body was not as tall and strong as the heavy cavalry warhorses. It had a tubular body, a narrow chest, a long back, and shallow ribs. Although its back was narrow, it was strong and powerful. Its muscles were more developed than ordinary warhorses, and its fur was glossy. Those who were familiar with the breed of warhorses could tell at a glance that this horse was from the northern borderline and definitely had the bloodline of the Fergana horse of Shalon. It was fast, had great endurance, and came and went like the wind. Of course, this kind of horse was also specially allocated to scouts to ensure their mobility so that they could escape as soon as they discovered the enemy. The deputy general looked at the warhorse with a heavy expression. He raised his hand and touched the blood stain. With a slight sniff, he knew that it was human blood and not horse blood. The soldier said, "Deputy General, this warhorse's abdomen is slightly injured." The deputy general looked in the direction that the soldier was pointing and saw a palm-long wound on the side of the horse's abdomen. Some of the blood had already coagulated. With his many years of experience, he could tell at a glance what kind of sharp weapon had caused the wound. "The horse is back. Where is the person?" the deputy general asked. The soldier replied, "I didn't find him. When the horse came back, I didn't see anyone." The deputy general's heart sank. He vaguely guessed that the scout had died. He asked again, "Other than this horse, did any other horses come back?" The soldier shook his head. The deputy general quickly passed the news to Xianxia. The mission of this batch of scouts was not to investigate the front but the rear. Now they had been killed. If not for the fact that the horse knew the way and ran back with injuries, they probably wouldn't have found it. It could be seen that the Lord's guess was correct. There was indeed an enemy force hiding in the dark. Hearing the deputy general's words, Xianxia's brows furrowed, leaving faint wrinkles between his brows. Order the entire army to be on guard. He knew very well what kind of equipment his scouts were equipped with. Almost all of them were equipped with good horses that had both speed and endurance. Under such circumstances, they were still killed by the enemy. It could be seen that the enemy was not easy to deal with. If the warhorse hadn't come back on its own, Xianxia wouldn't have known that the enemy had appeared. Not long after he issued the order, there was a rumbling sound from behind. The ground shook even more violently. "Kill!" Accompanied by thunderous shouts, a dense horde of enemies quickly appeared in their field of vision. The deputy general's warhorse was startled. He was shocked by the number of enemies. He called out to Xianxia loudly, "General, the enemy is here." Xianxia glanced at them and his face darkened. The enemy was less than 3 miles away. How did they do it so close? If the Lord hadn't warned them, the enemy would have launched a sneak attack and the army would have suffered heavy losses. "What are you panicking for? Get into formation!" Xianxia shouted, as if he knew what was going on. 3 miles was nothing to the enemy cavalry. These cavalry were not easy to deal with. They were very skilled with their bows and arrows. Before they even got close, the arrows had already fallen. Xianxia was calm. On one hand, he commanded the soldiers to block the arrows with the shield wall. On the other hand, he ordered the archers to shoot at the enemy under the protection of the shield wall. He tried to clear out the nearest wave of enemies. However, the distance between the two sides was too short. The archers couldn't shoot more than a few rounds. The enemy cavalry opened the way, and the troops behind them followed closely. There were tens of thousands of them. Seeing that the enemy cavalry was close, Xianxia ordered the soldiers to line up with spears more than 10 feet long. They stabbed the enemy's warhorse's sternum, abdomen, and eyes. However, the mobility of the cavalry was a headache for all troops. The spears could only hinder them for a while. Jiang Pingji was the first to notice the unusual movements in the rear, but she didn't show it. Instead, she focused on the situation at the front. In order to deal with the sneak attack, she gave Xieze a lot of manpower. Not only was Xieze's military ability questionable, but the quality of his own troops and the quality of his own troops were also questionable. When the news of the sneak attack came, everyone was shocked. Only Jiang Pingji was calm as usual. She said, "Believe in Yuan Gui." She had given the enemy a warning, which was equivalent to cheating. Jiang Pingji would definitely beat him up. Inexplicably, Xieze's little universe, desire, erupted. The enemy troops who launched the sneak attack were not bystanders. They were the people Feng Zhu had brought from the front lines of Wanzhou. Chapter 1333. Military Advisor. This, Feng Zhu said in a hoarse voice, Lu Shi is indeed a terrifying person. He rarely admired anyone, but Jiang Pingji, who had made his plans fail time and time again, was definitely one of them. Those who guarded the rear under such circumstances were either people who were cautious and cowardly, or people who had foresight. Jiang Pingji could not be the former, so it could only be the latter. She had long guessed that Feng Zhu would lead the troops to attack the rear. What should we do now? The general looked anxious. His tough and rugged face was full of worry, and fine beads of sweat appeared on his forehead. What should we do? Feng Zhu said, "There's no turning back. Of course, we fight." Should he order the army to retreat because the enemy was on guard? The general looked embarrassed, as if he had realized that he had asked a stupid question. Little did he know that Feng Zhu was in a difficult position. The troops he led to attack Jiang Pingji's rear and coordinate with the front line would more or less boost the morale of Huang Song's main force. If he withdrew his troops to avoid the enemy's vanguard, the morale of the front line would inevitably collapse, and they would be like stray dogs. Therefore, even if he had to fight to the death, he could not take a step back. The matter of Jiang Pingji's rear being attacked was not only heard by Jiang Pingji and the others, but also by Huang Song, who was overseeing the army in the middle. After thinking about it, Huang Song still could not guess the identity of the person until Cheng Jing's words woke him up. "Lord, that must be Huaijia's troops." Cheng Jing counted the time with his fingers. The unfamiliar troops that attacked Jiang Pingji's rear must have been led by Feng Zhu. There was no one else but him. Huang Song was delighted. He quickly ordered his men to continue beating the drums to boost the morale of the soldiers. The drum beats fell like a rainstorm. Before Jiang Pingji could move, she suddenly caught a glimpse of a bullet screen. Her fingers trembled, and her perfect expression almost revealed a flaw. Xianxia, beating the drums on the battlefield. This is the same principle as playing dynamic music on a sports bike. Is it to stimulate the adrenaline? To the previous poster, "You're so naughty. How do you expect me to look directly at the background music of a sports bike?" War drums indeed had the effect of stimulating morale, but it had another important meaning, which was to convey orders and warnings. Soldiers fighting was not like TV dramas. Everyone knew martial arts, and fighting was as fancy as dancing. They only knew the simplest movements. Without martial arts, they were not afraid. With so many of them working together to attack at the same time, their lethality was not weaker than that of a martial arts master. According to the different drum beats, they attacked together, defended together, and chased after the enemy together. After all, this was an era without mobile phones, wireless Bluetooth, or even electronic loudspeakers. Huang Song gave the order to attack, and the drummers increased their tempo and frequency, oppressing the enemy with their momentum. If they could break through the enemy's line of defense in one go and inflict heavy casualties on the enemy, the morale of the soldiers would continue to rise. The soldiers under Jiang Pingji's command also noticed the changes in the rear. The frontline soldiers were timid for a moment. Before they could react, the enemy had already pounced on them like wolves and tigers. Perhaps the injuries on his body were not fatal, but the enemy's stomp was enough to turn him into a bloody pulp. Seeing the situation, Jiang Pingji immediately changed her tactics and adopted a defensive formation to defend against the enemy. The morale on Huang Song's side was not stable. As long as Feng Zhu's army could not break through the rear, and the frontline soldiers could not defeat the enemy, the morale of Huang Song's army would definitely plummet over time. When the time came, Jiang Pingji would give the order to switch from defense to offense and destroy the enemy's psychological defense in one fell swoop. She was calm and unhurried, issuing military orders one after another. Sure enough, Huang Song's side could not gain any advantage. On the other side, Xie Zhe's side had also stabilized the situation. Not only did he not allow the enemy to advance any further, but he also forced them to retreat a little. Today's battle is of utmost importance. Xie Zhe shouted loudly. I will live and die with you all. As he spoke, he took the lead and killed 2 enemies. The surrounding soldiers were greatly encouraged. Xie Zhe's martial arts skills were comparable to Li Yun's. Both of them gave it their all, but the odds of winning were 50-50. The long spear in his hand was like a part of his body. Under his control, a silver dragon-like light flashed in the air, piercing through flesh like lightning and taking away a few lives in an instant. After killing a few people, Xie Zhe gave several more orders in succession. The 2 sides were in a stalemate. It seemed that they were evenly matched, but Feng Zhu knew very well that as time went on, he would be the one who would lose. The army had set off from the front line of Wanzhou. Even though they had rested and reorganized halfway, the soldiers' bodies and spirits had not fully recovered. The enemy was different. Feng Zhu was thinking of countermeasures, but how could the battlefield be controlled by the wisdom of 1 or 2 people? Jiang Pingji observed the situation and suddenly said, Bogeo is about to lose. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, she did not have much of an advantage. Even if Huang Song was going to lose, it was impossible for him to lose so quickly. At the same time, Yang Si crossed his arms, twirled his neatly trimmed beard, and said, Huang Song's momentum is lost. Han Yu nodded. Why were the 3 of them so sure? Because they had all heard that there was a problem with the rhythm of the enemy's drums. The pitch, rhythm, and density of the drum beats all represented different meanings. Beating the drums to advance the troops, and stopping when the drums sounded. The enemy's drum beats were clearly for an attack, but the enemy had the intention to retreat. This was a clear sign that their morale had plummeted. Apart from that, the drummers' morale was low and they were distracted, so much so that the war drums made a few mistakes. This was fatal on the battlefield. Jiang Pingji saw that the timing was just right. She struck while the iron was hot and gave the order to attack. For a moment, the army pounced on the enemy like a dam that had been opened. The war drums also became louder and more intense. With one side rising and the other falling, Huang Song's troops were even more disadvantaged. Huang Song's face was livid. He clenched his molars tightly, and the blue veins on his forehead bulged. At that moment, a general who was covered in blood rushed over on horseback. He had suffered serious injuries and almost fell off when he dismounted. My lord, our front line has fallen. Huang Song closed his eyes tightly and said through gritted teeth, Retreat! Retreat! As soon as the order to retreat was issued, the soldiers who heard it hurriedly turned around and retreated. All of them only wanted to escape, which made it easy for the enemy who was chasing after them. Jiang Pingji's side pressed on with a spurt of energy and pursued the enemy. The number of corpses left behind by the enemy's retreat was almost equal to the previous losses. The front line won a great victory. Feng Zhu, who was in the rear, was also affected and quickly fell into a disadvantageous position. Jiang Pingji's gaze was distant. Her left hand gently stroked the hilt of the god-slaying saber at her waist. After a while, she said, Summon Captain Jiang. Mobilize 5,000 troops and horses and follow me. When Yang Si heard this, his nerves tightened with a clang. Han Yu was a little slow to react. His lord was going to, My lord, don't chase a cornered enemy. Yang Si widened his eyes and squeezed out the words that even he himself did not believe. Take advantage of their weakness and kill them. Jiang Pingji sneered. I only know how to beat a drowning enemy. When Jiang Nongqin received the news, She mobilized 5,000 elite cavalrymen without hesitation. No matter whether the Lord's orders were right or wrong, they were golden rules to her. Chapter 1334. They thought they could finally be at ease. Who knew that their lord was such a worrisome person? Han Yu said, "Are we short of 5,000 soldiers and horses? We to bring more." If it were not forbidden, Han Yu really wanted to bring all the troops to ensure his lord's safety. Jiang Pengji said, "Why do we need so many people? If 5,000 soldiers can't take down Bogeo, why should I keep them and waste our food?" If 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers could not take down the defeated soldiers who had lost their morale and were like stray dogs, Jiang Pengji really wanted to scold them as useless snacks. Although her words were harsh, no one could refute what Jiang Pengji said because she had the right to say so. "Nongqin, let's go." Jiang Pengji waved her horsewhip. Little White took the lead and rushed out. Jiang Nongqin rode her horse and followed closely behind. 5,000 light and heavy cavalry soldiers followed. Looking at his lord's back, Yang Si almost suffocated. He raised his hand and kept rubbing his left chest. With such a lord, his life would be shortened. Han Yu's face darkened. He caught a glimpse of Yang Si's action and asked, "What's wrong with you? Why didn't I know you were ill?" Yang Si said, "Since I followed such a lord, I'm worried that I'll fall ill." Han Yu was strangely silent for a few seconds. He could understand what Yang Si meant and felt the same way. Without comparison, there would be no harm. He thought of his former lord, Su Bei. Although he was not as versatile as his lord, at least he was less worrisome. The two of them did not have time to chat. Although Huang Song's side had retreated in defeat, they had not dealt with the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind. Although Xie Zhe did not have a strong desire for fame and fortune, as a military general, who would dislike having too much glory bestowed upon him, Xie Zhe was no exception. If they could completely defeat the enemy troops who had attacked them from behind, it would be a great achievement. Feng Ju saw that the situation was hopeless and began to retreat in an orderly manner. However, the soldiers had lost their morale. One by one, they were like headless flies, throwing away their armor and running for their lives. The negative emotions were contagious. First, it affected a group of people, then it spread to thousands of people. Feng Ju saw this and his face turned ashen. He almost fell off the horse. Fortunately, he was supported by someone. Otherwise, he would have been injured or killed if he had fallen from such a high horse in such a chaotic situation. "Military advisor, this general will escort you out of here." Feng Ju woke up from the discomfort of the spinning world. His lips were dry and peeled, and he looked particularly haggard. "You don't have to worry about me. It's more important to gather the troops and retreat. As long as the green hills last, one need not worry about firewood." If they missed the best opportunity, they would be completely annihilated. Just as they were talking, a deafening battle cry came from behind them. Even though they had been fighting for several hours and the soldiers were exhausted, the enemies in front of them were all meritorious. With meritorious service, they would be able to earn high rewards. No matter how tired their bodies were, their minds were still active and excited. "Oh no, military advisor, the enemy is here." As they fled, the number of soldiers around them grew fewer and fewer. The soldiers who were left behind were either hacked to death or captured alive. General left the battlefield with nearly 1,000 of his trusted subordinates and Feng Ju, but Xie Zhe seemed to have eaten a weight and was determined to chase after them. After a round of pursuit and encirclement, there were only 100 or 200 soldiers left. Most of them were injured and had almost no combat power left. The enemy was still following closely behind. The night was getting darker and darker. A cold wind blew, bringing with it the strong smell of blood. It was so strong that it was nauseating. The battle cry was so faint that it seemed to be drifting from the horizon. Feng Ju stared at the enemy soldiers who surrounded them with a fierce look. Xie Zhe was riding a tall horse. The two sides were more than 10 feet apart. The soldiers surrounded them and tied their hands behind their backs. They even put swords to their necks. Xie Zhe glanced around and was satisfied. He raised his hand and waved. "Take all of them back and wait for my lord to deal with them." Feng Zhu tried to struggle, but the soldiers who restrained him were so strong that he couldn't move at all. There were different levels of captives. The soldiers who sold their physical strength were at the bottom of the pyramid. The value they produced was not enough for them to eat. Feng Zhu belonged to the top of the pyramid. Xie Zhe wanted to bring rare talents to his lord, regardless of whether they could pledge allegiance to her or not. To prevent Feng Zhu from having thoughts of suicide, he even sent people to watch over him. Feng Zhu snorted sarcastically. At the same time, Jiang Pingji led 5,000 troops to chase after Huang Song. Although it was said to be a chase, it was actually a slaughter. Many enemy soldiers tried to stop them, but they died under the horses' hooves. Their corpses were trampled into minced meat. Wherever the cavalry passed, piles of corpses were left. The darkness of the night was a good cover, but it didn't pose any obstacle to Jiang Pingji. Therefore, the time she took to catch up with Huang Song was much shorter than what he had expected. Facing 5,000 light and heavy cavalry, Huang Song only felt calm. Instead, he felt like, it's finally here. Originally, there were 30,000 to 50,000 remaining soldiers to cover his escape, but the soldiers were already scared out of their wits by the enemy. How could they still have the will to fight? Under the onslaught of the enemy's pursuers, some fled, some got lost, and some fell apart. When Huang Song was besieged, there were less than 3,000 soldiers around him. 3,000 crippled soldiers against 5,000 elite cavalrymen. The result was obvious. This could be considered a one-sided slaughter. When Huang Song and the others were captured, the outcome was finally decided. Jiang Pengji swung the blood-stained god-slaying knife in her hand. The blood left a long mark on the ground. She called out loudly, "Is that Bogeo in front?" Hearing how Jiang Pengji addressed him, Huang Song, who was in dire straits, laughed bitterly. "Lanting, are you still willing to call me that? In this chaotic world, you and I have no choice. But business is business, personal is personal," Jiang Pengji said. "Don't you still call me Lanting?" "I have no choice." Huang Song looked dispirited. "But business is business. Lanting, have you thought about how to deal with me?" Jiang Pengji didn't say it explicitly. It wasn't a good place to talk about it. She said faintly, "I'm not a heartless person who kills indiscriminately. Back then, I chose this path because the situation forced me to. People weren't ambitious from the beginning." Huang Song was no different. Before the destruction of Dongqing, his ambition was to be an honest and capable official. He wanted to change the prejudice of others and bring prosperity to the country. However, this hotbed of troubled times gave him unprecedented ambition. Now that he had fallen from the peak to the bottom, he had to bow down to his former opponent. Most importantly, after submitting, he would be suspected for the rest of his life. Who would be willing to live such a life? Huang Song had considered the worst-case scenario. He would kill himself to protect his wife and children. But every time he thought of what his wife, Qi Chaolan, said that day, the courage to kill himself receded like the tide. He said, "Lanting, you've really given me a difficult problem." Chapter 1335. The night breeze blew, adding to the indescribable loneliness. Huang Song was silent for a long time, as if he was considering the truth of Jiang Pengji's words. "It's getting late. If we don't go back soon, I'm afraid Zixiao and the rest will get sick from anxiety." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and said to Jiang Nongqin, "Bogeo is my close friend. His status is not comparable to that of an ordinary person. Instruct your subordinates to be careful and not to neglect the distinguished guest." Jiang Nongqin had no objections. She accepted the order and said, "I will obey your orders." Although Huang Song was a captive, Jiang Pengji did not have any intention to kill him. Naturally, she would not deliberately humiliate him. If he was sensible, why not spare his life? If he would rather break than bend, she could only kill him. She and Huang Song were indeed friends, but feelings were a supplement and not a necessity for her. If she had to give it up, she would not be sentimental. Huang Song did not say anything, but he did not resist either. He tacitly agreed to Jiang Pingji's arrangements. Compared to his calmness and indifference, the reactions of the others were more intense. Some cried hysterically, some were like dead water, and all their hopes were dashed. Some were trembling with fear. When the soldiers wanted to tie him up with ropes, his body shook like a sieve. Despair shrouded them like dark clouds. No one knew where their future lay. According to the rules of the past, if the lord of a force was defeated and captured, most of the officials under her would not have a good ending. Some could still jump ship and change bosses. Some would forever be suspected and suppressed because they had a close relationship with their old masters. They would be depressed for the rest of their lives. Jiang Pingji did not think so much. She only knew that the battle between her and Huang Song had finally come to an end. All that was left was to deal with the aftermath and recover Haozhou. It would not take much time. After thinking about it carefully, she felt that the pressure on her shoulders had lightened. She even had the leisure to chat and laugh with Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Nongqin did not dare to keep pace with her lord. She maintained a respectful posture. Even when riding a horse, she lagged behind her by half a horse's body. Jiang Pingji said, "You have made such a great contribution this time. What do you want, Nongqin?" Jiang Nongqin said without hesitation, "It's my honor to go through fire and water for you, my lord. How can I claim credit and ask for rewards?" It was reasonable for her to give up her life for the lord. Jiang Nongqin did not lack anything. The lord had given her a chance to perform meritorious deeds, which was already considered a gift. Jiang Pingji sighed. "I know you are loyal to me, but you have to think about yourself." Jiang Nongqin said matter-of-factly, "I'm very good." She felt that her current life couldn't be any better. Her lord had given her a second life and allowed her to live a life that she had never dared to imagine before. Occasionally, when she thought back to the past, she was a little surprised. Was the me before the age of 13 really her? She grew faster than her peers and had a bigger appetite. Because of this, her parents treated her harshly and scolded her. Her grandmother regarded her as a jinx and repeatedly bullied her. At the worst, she broke a pole that was as thick as an arm. After that, her so-called relatives sold her to a broker in exchange for a meager amount of money. He entered the Lu residence by chance, but because he looked more mature, he was humiliated by the steward's son. She had long been ready to die. The Lord had given her the meaning and courage to live, allowing her to enter a level that most people in the world could not reach. In her heart, the lowly servant Zhu had long died. The one who survived was the Lord's Jiang Nongqin. Jiang Pingji was very stingy with her feelings, but Jiang Nongqin was one of the special cases. "I heard that you and Jing Rong." Jiang Pingji was not a professional iceman, but every pair of mandarin ducks that had been brought together by her was a model couple. Jiang Nongqin's expression was calm. Not a trace of shyness could be seen. She was calm as if she was talking about the weather. "What's wrong with military advisor Yang? I remember that Nongqin is only a year and a few months older than me." Jiang Pingji said, "The war will stop for a while. Don't you want to take advantage of the gap to settle the matter between you and Jing Rong? His peers have given birth to a few children, but he is still alone." Jiang Nongqin frowned and her tone was a little unfriendly. Of course, this unfriendly tone was directed at Yang Si. Could it be that military advisor Yang said something in front of the Lord? If not, why would the Lord suddenly urge them to get married? Jiang Pingji said, "No, I just dislike his old age. If the two of you don't hurry up, it will affect the children more or less." Jiang Nongqin said, "Will it?" Jiang Pingji said, "Jing Rong was addicted to alcohol when he was young, and his private lifestyle was. He is old, so it will naturally affect him." Jiang Shaowei had never doubted the Lord's words. "I will consider this matter carefully." Thinking of the children of the Golden Scale Academy, Jiang Nongqin's mind started to work. They were all the pillars of the Lord's future. Thinking of this, she did not seem to be very resistant to this matter. Jiang Pingji said, "If Nongqin gets married, I will prepare a wedding dowry for you that will definitely not be worse than those of the princes and their grandchildren." Marriage in ancient times was particular about matching families. The economic strength and social status of the man and the woman would not be too far apart. Therefore, the betrothal gifts and dowries of both parties were mostly equal. If one party was more powerful than the other, and the man's betrothal gift was less, others would criticize him for marrying into the family and claiming connections with the in-laws. If the woman's dowry was less, others would also criticize the woman's family for selling their daughter. If Jiang Pengji really wanted to prepare a wedding dowry for Jiang Nongqin, Yang Si would have to empty his family's pockets. Jiang Nongqin revealed a faint smile, her eyes overflowing with happiness. Yang Si was speechless. I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. Jiang Pengji spent an hour before returning. Everyone was already looking forward to it, their necks stretched out. Hearing the movements of the army returning, they hurriedly went forward. Their first reaction was to look for Jiang Pengji. He looked left and right and saw that his lord was unscathed. Only then did his little heart return to its original place. Jiang Pengji said, "Bogeo and the rest entertain them well. Everything will be discussed tomorrow." Yang Si deliberately lagged a few steps behind so that he could walk side by side with Jiang Nongqin. The latter was frowning as if she was thinking about a huge problem. Jiang Nongqin said, "For the next few days, military advisor Yang should abstain from alcohol and food. You should learn more about health from military advisor Wei." Yang Si asked. He did not know what Jiang Nongqin's temperament was like in the past, but after the two of them got to know each other, he realized that this woman was more reticent than anyone else. She rarely spoke so much at once, especially when she was concerned about his health. He was flattered by the sudden concern. Jiang Nongqin said, "Military advisor Yang, do you have any plans for having children?" Yang Si said, "I haven't thought about it." In the past, he was an unmarried dink. He did not even have a wife, so where would he get a child? Jiang Nongqin said, "I hope that he will be a promising successor. If he can't be brought up, it's better to get rid of him early so that he won't tarnish the family's reputation." Yang Si was speechless. With such a mother, the child would have to open his eyes wide and weigh his own worth before reincarnating. Chapter 1336. Jiang Nongqin was different from ordinary women. Although the two of them communicated their thoughts, Yang Si felt that there was still a gap between them. She took the initiative to bring up the topic. Yang Si felt that he had finally written the first line. The rest was much simpler. However, the two of them were not emotional people. They talked more about official matters. He asked curiously, "Where did the Lord capture Huang Song?" Jiang Nongqin said, "It doesn't matter where. No matter where he is, he can't escape from the Lord's palm." Yang Si had a certain immunity to such die-hard comments. He automatically ignored them. Did he have any extreme reactions when he was captured? Jiang Nongqin said, "He's like a turtle in a jar. What's the use of resisting? The Lord treats him well. If he doesn't appreciate it, he'll die." Yang Si was speechless. His heart disease was going to act up again. Apart from a small number of people who were separated in the chaos, most of the mainstays under Huang Song's command were captured and became Jiang Pengji's prisoners. The latter did not have the habit of abusing captives, but she would not treat defeated people as distinguished guests. Apart from Huang Song, who was treated well, the other people's conditions were very ordinary. The food supply was the same as that of ordinary soldiers. Some people flew into a rage and knocked over their food. Some people ate in silence. Cheng Jing was detained alone, so Wei Si easily found him. When he saw Cheng Jing, Wei Si was carrying a food box in his hand. There were a few plates of hot dishes and freshly made white rice on the top of the box. At the bottom was a set of clean clothes that he had never worn before. Wei Si did not expect to see Cheng Jing again. According to the trajectory of his previous life, the latter would commit suicide in prison. On second thought, the friendship between Cheng Jing and Huang Song was not as deep as it was in his previous life. Naturally, he would not commit suicide for his master. Cheng Jing was locked in a small tent. There were many soldiers guarding outside. He could not escape even if he had wings. "Why are you here?" Cheng Jing put down his bowl and chopsticks. He raised his head to look at Wei Si and said with understanding, "Did you become a lobbyist?" It was dark inside the tent. There was only a dim oil lamp on the low table. It made Qingjing look even more haggard and wretched. Wei Ci did not say anything. He bent down to take a few candles and kindling from the bottom of the food box and lit them up one by one. Only then did the tent become much brighter. "My lord did not instruct me on this," Wei Ci said straightforwardly. "I'm just worried that my senior brother will be neglected, so I came over to take a look." Under the candlelight, Wei Ci saw that Qingjing's chin had green stubble and his eyes were bloodshot. Where was his usual elegant demeanor? Qingjing did not get angry. He would not be surprised if Wei Ci was really a lobbyist. "You rarely call me senior brother Jing." Wei Ci was considered Master Yuanjing's last disciple. The seniority of the disciples did not depend on their age, but on the time they joined the sect. After all, we're from the same sect. Whether you call him senior brother or Yumo, isn't it still the same person? Wei Ci took a seat opposite Qingjing and took out the dishes from the food box. The aroma of the food assailed their nostrils and made their thumbs twitch. Even though Qingjing didn't have much of an appetite right now, when he smelled the aroma of food he faintly felt hungry. The corners of Qingjing's mouth twitched as he forced a smile. "Zixiao wants to use this to bribe people?" Wei Ci said as he took out 2 jars of wine. "Today, we won't talk about official matters. We'll just reminisce about the past." Qingjing's temperament was different from his other brothers. Wei Ci wasn't confident that he could convince him to join the Lord. Wei Ci might not believe it, but this time, he was really here to take care of senior brother Qingjing. There was one thing that Wei Ci didn't understand in his previous and current lives. Why did Qingjing follow Huang Song? Wasn't his Dao to follow the will of heaven and support the orthodox? Whether it was in terms of family background or personal charm, Huang Song was worlds apart from the word orthodox. Wei Ci asked without hesitation. Qingjing took a sip of wine. This wine was very different from what he usually drank. The taste was more mellow, and there was a burning sensation as it flowed down his throat. The aftereffect was quite strong. After drinking a few cups, his face turned red. His eyes were watery and he was also a little sleepy. "Zixiao, do you know the origin of the lords? Bogeo's ancestors?" Wei Ci was stunned. "Isn't this person from the Yuanshi family?" Qingjing said, "Bogeo's branch is the only surviving descendant of the Xia royal family. In the last years of the Xia kingdom, the royal family was almost wiped out. Our ancestors were grateful for the great ancestors' promotion, so they risked their lives to escort the last emperor's young daughter to escape. They hid in a branch of the family and carefully took care of her as she grew up. However, no one told her her identity. Our ancestors also treated her as their own daughter. At that time, the world was divided into 5 countries. If her identity was revealed, not only would it harm her, it would also implicate the Cheng family." Wei Ci suddenly understood something. In that case, the last emperor's concubine married into the Yuanshi family? Qingjing nodded, confirming Wei Ci's words. At that time, the Yuanshi family was still considered a prominent martial family. The Qing family married the concubine into this family in order to better protect this bloodline. Who would have thought that the ancestors of the Yuanshi family would make mistakes one after another, and in just 2 generations, they fell into such dire straits? Huang Song's grandfather committed a crime and almost implicated the 3 families. It was only with the help of the Qing family that the matter was settled. The death penalty could be forgiven, but punishment was inevitable. Huang Song's father was exiled and died halfway through. The orphan and widowed mother had no one to rely on, and the Yuanshi family refused to take care of them. Huang Song's mother could only rely on her embroidery skills to earn money to support the family. When Huang Song's mother was widowed, she was still very young. By chance, she caught the eye of the Dongqing Emperor's favorite chamberlain, Huang Tan, and he came to ask for her hand in marriage. Huang Song's mother remarried, and Huang Song's father changed his surname to Huang Tan's stepson. Huang Song naturally followed his father's surname. Not many people knew about this old past, even Huang Song himself did not know. Of course, Qingjing assisted him partly because of their bloodline, but also because Huang Song had his merits. If he could restore the glory of his ancestors, that would be the best. Senior brother, tell me about this. Wei Ci was a little puzzled. According to the normal scenario, if the Lord knew that Huang Song had this relationship, Huang Song's life would be in danger. Cheng Jing said, the remaining power of the Xia kingdom has long been gone. Whether Bogeo has royal blood or not, does it matter? Moreover, there were only a few people who knew about this matter, and most of them were dying. Who would believe that the grandson of a eunuch in the eyes of outsiders was actually the last descendant of the previous dynasty's royal family? Senior brother also said that the Xia kingdom no longer exists. Do you still insist that they are the legitimate ones? Wei Ci asked. Cheng Jing smiled and said, that depends on whether the Duke of Lanting that you serve can become the legitimate one. When others heard this, they would probably think that Cheng Jing had the intention to pledge allegiance, but Wei Ci knew very well that he was determined not to pledge allegiance. Unless the Lord can really ascend to the throne. Wei Ci sighed and said, Senior brother, do you have the heart to waste your time and be an idler in the mountains? Cheng Jing said, this is not a question of whether I have the heart or not. This is a question of whether the Duke of Lanting is willing to fulfill my wish. He did not have the initiative. Cheng Jing was not against serving Jiang Pingji, but it was not the current her. Wei Ci said, Senior brother, don't you think it's a pity? What a waste of a good time. If the world was at peace, it would be extremely difficult for Cheng Jing to be put in an important position. Would he really not be depressed in the future? Cheng Jing said, there's Wei Ci, Yang Si, and Han Yu. Cheng Jing is not missing. The Yuans under Huang Song were the only ones who were powerful. He had seen how much harm they had caused. If the Langya branch was completely powerful, would Jiang Pingji feel that she could not do anything alone? It was better to retreat in the face of the current and seek peace. It would not be too late to become an official after the world was at peace. Chapter 1337. Wei Ci got up and bade farewell. He stopped in front of the tent and said, I will not hide Huang Song's past from you, my lord. It was true that Cheng Jing was Wei Ci's eldest senior brother, but Jiang Pingji was Wei Ci's lord and true love. There was a distinction between close and distant, and there was a distinction between public and private interests. It's fine. Cheng Jing closed his eyes lightly. He was not surprised by Wei Ci's choice. It would be strange if Wei Ci helped Huang Song hide the truth. Countless thoughts flashed through Wei Ci's mind. The scenes of his previous life flashed past his eyes quickly and finally turned into a sigh. In his previous life, he had been very curious as to why Huang Song, who was only the son of a eunuch, was favored by Cheng Jing, and the Cheng clan did not object. Unfortunately, they were not fated to be brothers. Wei Ci did not even make it to Cheng Jing's funeral, much less seek Cheng Jing to resolve his doubts. If Huang Song was a descendant of the previous dynasty's imperial family, everything would make sense. Wei Ci hurriedly went to look for Jiang Pingji. She had just finished bathing and was dressed in moon-white pajamas with a large, warm cloak draped over her shoulders. Her long, jet-black hair was steaming and fragrant after a bath. When Wei Ci walked over, she was sitting on the couch, wiping her wet hair with her body turned sideways. What is it, Zixiao? Jiang Pingji twisted the ends of her hair with a dry towel as she tilted her head and asked Wei Ci. Under the illumination of the orange-yellow candlelight, Jiang Pingji's side profile seemed to have a gentle filter. The gentle color of her brows and eyes made Wei Ci's heart beat wildly. Wei Ci pretended to be calm as he bowed with his hands clasped in front and greeted respectfully. Only then did he open his mouth to explain the purpose of his visit. His eyes were fixed on Jiang Pingji's hair. She looked at her wet hair, then at Wei Ci, and handed him the cloth. Wei Ci was stunned on the spot for a while. He went forward and half knelt beside her. He raised his hand to take the towel from her hand and carefully wiped her wet hair. His movements were very gentle, as if every strand of hair was a treasure to him. In comparison, Jiang Pingji's movements were much rougher. Just now, I went to visit senior brother Cheng Jing. During our conversation, I heard a piece of news. My lord should also listen to it. Jiang Pengji casually crossed her legs and rested her elbows on her knees. She looked relaxed. News? What kind of news is so important that you have to come all the way here, and at this time? If it was not important news, why would Wei Se look for her at such an ambiguous time? Wasn't this sending the quack to the tiger's den? Wei Si said, regarding Huang Song's past. Jiang Pengji frowned and asked in confusion, Bogeo's past? Is there anything special about his background? She didn't have any opinions about family status, but she also knew that Huang Song's family background was very criticized. Could it be that there was a twist in this? Wei Si said softly, on the surface, Huang Song is the step-grandson of Dongqing's minister Huang Tan. He comes from the Yuan family, but there's more to it than meets the eye. According to his senior apprentice brother, Huang Song's ancestor was actually the empress concubine of the last emperor of the Grand Xia Empire. Back then, the Xia kingdom was destroyed and the world was divided into 5 parts. The royal family was almost completely wiped out. Only the Cheng clan's ancestor remembered old kindness and risked his life to bring the infant empress concubine out of the palace, placing her in the Cheng clan's branch family to raise. Many years later, this empress concubine married into the Yuan clan. The branch emperor concubine belongs to is Huang Song's branch, so he is a descendant of the imperial family. Jiang Pengji said, why haven't I heard of this? Wei Si combed her wet hair with his fingers and said, once the identity of being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family gets out, it will definitely lead to the destruction of the clan. It's reasonable for the Cheng clan to keep it a secret. My senior brother assisted Huang Song. Huang Song's identity is also part of the reason. Jiang Pengji recalled Qing Jing's temperament. Wei Si's words were 90% true. However, Jiang Pengji said, the founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was also of humble origin, right? Qing Jing is so persistent about being a descendant of the Xia kingdom's imperial family? It doesn't make sense. In terms of background, Huang Song was also a distance away from being orthodox. Wei Si knew that some parts of his lord's history weren't very good, but he wasn't surprised. Instead, he considerately and attentively explained to her, my lord, you may not know this, but although the founder of the Xia kingdom's imperial family was of humble origin, his ancestors were also illustrious and wealthy. According to the history of this time and space, the recent history included the chaotic times of the 16 kingdoms, the Xia kingdom, the 5 kingdoms, and the current chaotic times. Before the 16 kingdoms, the Central Plains had also been unified for 367 years, and it was called Beichen. The genealogy of the Xia kingdom's imperial family could be traced back to the Beichen royal family. The history of the Cheng clan's prosperity was also calculated from the period when Beichen was prosperous. Jiang Pengji listened carefully and laughed. I didn't expect Bogeo to have such an ancestor. Does he know about this? Wei Si shook his head and said, most likely he doesn't know. If he knew, he would have used this to change the public's opinion. In an era that was particular about one's background, it was better to rely on one's ancestors. Even if one's ancestor had long passed away, he could still protect his descendants in public opinion. If Huang Song could be blessed with this huge halo, why would he have to bear the stigma of being the grandson of a eunuch for so many years? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, if I were Bogeo, even if I knew, I wouldn't say anything. Wei Si asked, why? Jiang Pengji said, how could such an important card be revealed from the beginning? The world's evaluation of him is so unbearable. Even if he can dig out the genealogy to prove his identity, outsiders won't believe it. They will only believe in the facts that they have determined. Instead, they will slander Huang Song for using unscrupulous means to build up support and slander his ancestors. When he has a certain level of success and can look down on others, it will be better to reveal it. No matter how good the card was, it still depended on the timing. That was what he said, but Huang Song really did not know about this. Qing Jing also planned to reveal it when the time was right. However, Qing Jing could not wait for this opportunity. Jiang Pengji raised her hand and tucked her long hair behind her ear. A faint smile hung at the corner of her lips. as if she did not take Wei Si's news to heart. Wei Si asked, "How do you plan to deal with Huang Song, my lord?" Jiang Pingji said, "He's a friend, after all. I don't plan to kill him. The decision of how to deal with him lies in his own hands." "Do you mean to let him go, my lord?" Wei Si's hand paused. "If you don't pull out the roots, my lord knows, there will be endless trouble in the future." Jiang Pingji played with her hair and said with a smile, "Naturally, I won't let him go so easily. There is no free lunch in this world. If he wants to protect the lives of himself and his family, he has to pay a price. I guarantee that he will not become a threat to me in the future. There was only one life. If it was gone, it would be gone." It all depended on whether Huang Song was willing to pay for it. A trace of doubt flashed in Wei Si's eyes. He did not know what his lord had thought of. "I plan to have a talk with Bogeo. If he agrees, what's wrong with me letting him go? If he doesn't agree, I will give him a dignified death for the sake of our friendship in the past." Jiang Pingji grabbed her half-dry hair. "By the way, what's Qing Jing's attitude?" Wei Si said vaguely, "He supports the orthodoxy." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and asked in return, "What if I become the orthodoxy?" Wei Si said, "I'll be at your command, my lord." Chapter 1338. Jiang Pingji asked Wei Si to help her dry her hair. She took out a green hair tie and tied her long, smooth hair behind her back. The attire greatly reduced her original sharpness, but instead added a touch of gentleness. She had the charm of a girl for the first time. "Zixiao, are you curious about the method I used to solve Bogeo's problem?" Wei Si nodded honestly. He was indeed curious, but there were some things he couldn't ask too deeply. He could only bury his doubts in his heart. "Zixiao, why don't you come with me?" Jiang Pengji stood up and tidied the clothes draped over her shoulders. She said with a smile, "If I go to see Bogeo like this and no one follows me, who knows what kind of scandals will happen outside?" They did have scandals in the past, but no one took it seriously. Wei Si lowered his eyes and didn't comment, but the curvature of his lips revealed his inner thoughts. "Oh yes, remember to bring a set of brush, ink, and paper. Bring a few more sets of paper." Jiang Pingji leisurely walked in her wooden clogs to see Huang Song. Wei Si followed closely. The patrolling soldiers stood and saluted when they saw the two of them. "Bogeo shouldn't be asleep yet, right?" Wei Si said with a smile, "Once he becomes my lord's captive, I'm afraid he won't be able to sleep even if he has a big heart." Huang Song indeed hadn't fallen asleep. He tossed and turned over Jiang Pingji's words, "How will you know if it's a difficult or easy question if you don't try?" He wasn't sure what Jiang Pingji meant. It wasn't that he was stupid, he just didn't dare to believe it. What was the reason for letting him go? Was it because of the so-called youthful friendship? Such an excuse could only deceive ignorant people. In the face of conflicts of interest, all emotions had to give way to conflicts of interest. If Jiang Pingji was an emotional person, perhaps it would be somewhat believable. However, he was a rational person and wouldn't easily be swayed by his emotions. He thought about it and still felt that it was better to commit suicide. As long as he died, Jiang Pingji wouldn't be ruthless toward his former officials. At the same time, she would treat his family well. The wife and children shouldn't be implicated. A dignified lord wouldn't treat orphans and widows harshly for the sake of his reputation. Su Pei's family was the best example. Han Yu had also joined Jiang Pingji's camp. He would more or less take care of his former master's family and children. It might not be very glamorous, but at least they would be safe. Huang Song's current mood was somewhat similar to Jiang Pingji's in the past. Back then, she had been betrayed and slandered by her companions, and the Federation had secretly arrested her. Her first reaction was to resist arrest by force and chase after the real culprit single-handedly. As a soldier of the Federation, she naturally trusted it, but because of the conflict of interests, this trust had to be marked with a question mark. "I knew you hadn't slept." After Jiang Pingji entered the tent, she happened to see Huang Song staring blankly at the saber on the table. She smiled without changing her expression. Behind her were Wei Si and a few cooks from the logistics department. The cooks were carrying utensils for roasting meat and hot pot, as well as many ingredients. Huang Song looked up and was dumbfounded. What kind of stance is this? Jiang Pingji said, I'm looking for you for supper. I'm hungry. Huang Song. Jiang Pingji raised her hand and threw the sword to Wei Xi. She asked casually, Bogeo, is this sword expensive? This sword was given to me by my grandfather when he was crowned Emperor Song. Although it isn't precious, it holds great significance. Jiang Pingji said, so it was a gift from an elder? If the elder knew that the sword he gave you ended your life, he wouldn't feel good. As she spoke, the cooks tidied up the table and set up the roasting pan and cauldron. The ingredients were placed on a separate rack. Another person lit the cauldron and poured the seasoning that had been seasoned with good flavor. It's a pity that alcohol is forbidden in the army. Otherwise, we can have supper and drink at the same time. Jiang Pingji sat opposite Huang Song, while Wei Xi sat beside her and behind her. Lanting, why are you here? Huang Song didn't have the appetite to eat. He said directly, what's the matter? Why don't you tell me? Jiang Pingji moved her chopsticks and put the ingredients into the boiling pot. She smiled and said, when we're 60 years old, I wonder if we'll have the opportunity to have a meal together. Huang Song's expression changed. Lanting, what do you mean? I don't like to force things. You know my temperament, Jiang Pingji said. If you've made up your mind to die, I'll take care of your funeral properly based on our past friendship. If you still have the thought of living, I'm not a narrow-minded person who can't tolerate others. Huang Song knew her true attitude when she spoke so clearly. After a long time. For hidden dangers, it's best to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. You keep such a hidden danger. When did you become soft-hearted? Soft-hearted and reckless. When did you see me with such a thing? Jiang Pingji said, I'm willing to keep you. Naturally, I'm prepared. Let's make a pact. If you can agree to it, I'll naturally have the magnanimity to tolerate you. Jiang Pingji's solution was to make a pact with Huang Song. If he wanted his life, he would have to give up a certain amount of freedom and rights as the price. Huang Song was silent. I'm willing to swear an oath of blood with you. You don't have to worry that I'll betray you before the blood in my mouth dries. Huang Song's expression changed. He looked at Jiang Pingji with a complicated gaze. She was serious. It was the first time Huang Song recognized this point so clearly. In this era, everything was bad except for the high moral bottom line. They valued the spirit of the contract very much. After the oath was made, both parties would be bound. If one party took the lead in betraying the covenant, the moral level would be untenable. The other party could be ruthless and not be condemned by public opinion. To put it more clearly, both parties would sign a contract and abide by it. The contents of the contract would definitely favor Jiang Pingji. Huang Song would be the bound party. It was not enough to just have the oath. Jiang Pingji wanted everyone to know about the oath. Not only would it bind Huang Song, but it would also bind his former officials. It was not a big deal to let Huang Song live. She wanted Huang Song to live well so that his former officials would not dare to have a trace of disloyalty. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, if Bogeo is willing, we can discuss the contents of the oath while eating. Huang Song laughed bitterly and said, Lanting's thoughts are really very meticulous. Jiang Pingji turned her head and said, then I'll have to trouble Zixiao to help me write. Wei Xi agreed. The contents of the contract favored Jiang Pingji, but it was not unacceptable to Huang Song. It was even more lenient than expected. Huang Song's third generation would not be able to control real power, but his great-grandchildren could enter officialdom through normal channels. Huang Song himself would be conferred a title in the future, and his title would be inherited for 3 generations. Losing power and a certain amount of freedom in exchange for peace and wealth for the rest of his life. For the defeated, this was a good ending. It was much better than Su Pei's family, who had lost the protection of the head of the family and lived in fear. Huang Song carefully looked at the dozen pages of the contract that Wei Xi had drafted and asked a question. Children and grandchildren can't enter officialdom. What about daughters? Jiang Pingji said, if your daughter is capable, she can. Based on the current trend, men had far more political rights than women. Therefore, Jiang Pengji restricted Huang Song and his third generation. After all, they were old friends. She did not want Huang Song's family, who had no real power, to be looked down upon. Therefore she left some leeway. As long as Huang Song's daughter and granddaughter entered officialdom, his former officials who did not believe in him would not support them on account of their past relationship. Therefore, this group of people could not say anything about women entering officialdom. Wei Ci was speechless. Chapter 1339. Jiang Pengji ate her fill and got up to leave with Wei Ci. She realized that Wei Ci had been silent since the beginning. He was still holding a pile of contracts in his arms, as if he was thinking deeply about something. Jiang Pengji suddenly stopped. Wei Ci did not stop in time and bumped into her. She did not react, but Wei Ci did not stabilize his center of gravity and took 2 steps back. He came to his senses and quickly bowed to apologize. Jiang Pengji asked him, "What are you thinking about, Zixiao?" Wei Ci would hide it from others, but he would not hide it from the person in front of him. As long as she asked, he would tell her everything he knew. He said, "I'm thinking about my lord's intentions." Jiang Pengji tilted her head and looked at him. She chuckled and said, "What intentions could I have?" Wei Ci analyzed, "My lord and Huang Song made a blood pact. On the surface, this pact is not binding Huang Song, but my lord. Huang Song had already been defeated. If the lord wanted him to live or die, how could Huang Song, the loser, resist?" Not only did Jiang Pengji keep Huang Song alive, but she also wanted to make a blood pact with him. Huang Song lost his power and certain freedom, but he and his family no longer had any worries. As long as his family behaved themselves, no one could touch Huang Song's family, be it the lord or the future lord. A mere pact could protect the lives of Huang Song's 3 generations. When his great-grandchildren were born and grew up, it would be 50 or 60 years later. 50 or 60 years was neither long nor short. The world would change. Who knew what would happen in the future? Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this pact was not only not a bad thing for Huang Song, but it was also a great thing. However, Wei Ci smelled something different. Huang Song's words, "Children and grandchildren can't become officials, but what about daughters?" inspired him. The idle members of the royal family had no power. Their lives were worse than those of ordinary aristocrats, not to mention that Huang Song and Jiang Pengji had fought for the throne. Without power and being unable to become an official, what was the use of being a noble? In order to keep the family name, Huang Song's descendants had to expend energy to train their daughters and even granddaughters to help them enter the official career. Huang Song's old officials would not stop them for the sake of their past friendship and immediate benefits. Instead, they would push them from behind. 50 or 60 years was enough for the power structure of the court to change dramatically. When the empress ascended the throne, she could use force to overcome the chaos. After peace, the officials still hoped for a male heir to inherit the throne. The risk of a woman giving birth was too great. No one could guarantee that a woman giving birth would not be dangerous. To the officials, male heirs did not have the burden of pregnancy. Their chances of survival were higher, and they were more effective in stabilizing the court. In addition, women's status in the imperial court was too low. This was also one of the problems that hindered the succession system of the empress. Wei Ci guessed with a trembling heart. Was his lord paving the way for the future crown princess? Back then, when the crown princess was conferred and the previous inheritance mechanism was overturned, His Majesty, Wei Ci, was under a lot of pressure. Had he already made arrangements in this life? At the thought of his daughter from his past life, Wei Ci could not help but feel his eyes welling up. Although the emperor had resisted the pressure to make the crown princess, the officials had never stopped questioning Jiang Yan. She could only shut those people up if she did it flawlessly. One could imagine what kind of pressure this successor had to bear from birth to adulthood. Wei Ci was lost in thought. If his lord were to pave the way for her now, the pressure Yan would have to endure in the future, would it be less? Jiang Pengji smiled and said, "I'm not willing to suffer any losses. I gave Bogeo some benefits so that he could repay me more. Wei Ci was more certain of his guess after hearing it. My lord, you mean? Wei Ci almost bit his tongue. He could not pronounce his words clearly. You want, Jiang Pengji said, I heard you talk about her. Wei Ci was surprised. When Han Mei and Wan Er got married, you were drunk. You even warned Feng Yu from Zisher's family not to harm Yan. Is that child called Jiang Yan? Wei Ci's heart was thumping wildly. He could not remember this at all. Jiang Pengji laughed to herself. Her hearing was amazing. How could Wei Ci's small movements escape her ears? She had a daughter called Jiang Yan. Feng Zhen had a child called Feng Yu who was her lover. She was quite satisfied with this spoiler. Wei Ci admitted, yes, her name is Jiang Yan. Jiang Pengji said, she must be a very outstanding child. She looks like my lord, but her temperament is not the same. Yen's temperament is more reserved and deep. She was able to give lectures when she was only 10 years old. Even Wei Ci could not understand his daughter's thoughts. As the only heir to the new dynasty, other than herself, no one could imagine how much pressure she carried on her shoulders. Wei Ci could only accompany her in her studies as much as possible and teach her knowledge. Every time I see the grand tutor, I always feel very comfortable. I don't like those who only know how to drop books. They have never been emperors before. How would they know what an emperor should do? They only know how to read from the books. I've memorized all of them. This was what Jiang Yan said when she was 4 years old. It was also a rare willful statement from her. She usually did things very steadily. In comparison, Wei Tsong was more like a child. When Wei Ci realized that Jiang Yan had reached adulthood, he vaguely realized that the child had grown into a different person. She was the most qualified heir. Reserved and deep? Jiang Pengji said, she looks more like you. She knew very well what kind of temper she had, but her future daughter had a calm personality. Wei Ci said, my lord, are you paving the way for Yen this time? The past life is different from this one. If we have a child in the future, we don't know if it will be Yen Jiang Pengji said calmly. However, some things have to be prepared as soon as possible. Whether it's Yen or not, she's still our daughter. Huang Song's family prepared it for her. For this reason, I can tolerate Bogeo. She was not only interested in Huang Song, but also Huang Song's connections and old ministers. If she operated them well, they would definitely be of help. Since she knew the difficulties that she might face in the future, she could make arrangements early so that she would bear less pressure in the future. Wei Ci said, parents love their children, so they have far-reaching plans. Jiang Pengji smiled and winked. Our relationship is still clean. There are still 7 long years before we become parents. Zixiao, don't make me wait too long. Wei Ci was speechless. She always flirted with him. His lord's style was really different from her previous life. Jiang Pengji said, other than Jiang Yan, we have other children? Wei Ci was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, I have a son named Wei Kong. His courtesy name is Tingzhang. Hearing the surnames and names of the 2 children, Jiang Pengji understood the meaning behind it. She did not probe further. Instead, she returned to her tent. According to her observation, the 2 children were probably the wounds in Wei Ci's heart. This matter should be discussed later. The next day, Jiang Pengji gathered everyone and told them about her and Huang Song's blood oath. Everyone frowned slightly. They all agreed to eliminate Huang Song, but it was not impossible for their lord to keep Huang Song. Chapter 1340. The crowd did not understand Jiang Pengji's future as well as Wei Ci. Naturally, they did not see the hidden scheme in it. However, based on the contents of the alliance, their lord did not suffer any losses. Under this premise, as long as Huang Song kept his promise, it would not be a problem to spare his life. Jiang Pengji asked, does anyone have a different opinion? No one had any objections. If there was, it was mostly because they felt that the ban on the 3rd generation was too short. The 3 generations referred to Huang Song, Huang Song's sons, and Huang Song's grandsons. That guy had already married and had children. His children were already a few years old. It seemed that it would only take a few years for his great-grandchildren to grow up. Everyone was worried that the time was too short. However, calculating the time, by the time Huang Song's great-grandchildren became officials, he would have long been buried. His former officials would not be left. Thinking about it this way, it was acceptable to ban the third generation from becoming officials. The Lord allowed Huang Song to live, but she would not let him and his descendants be unable to become officials forever. This was not showing mercy but deliberately finding fault. Jiang Pengji saw that the young princesses were so reasonable and felt satisfied. She then ordered people to prepare for the alliance ceremony. She had formed alliances with people many times, but most of them were verbal agreements. An alliance made with blood was different. The audience in the streaming room thought that this kind of alliance was like dripping blood into a wine cup and drinking it. In reality, it was smearing the blood of livestock on the lips to show sincerity and determination to form an alliance. For a TV series, the former was naturally more expressive. Jiang Pengji turned off the streaming earlier yesterday, so the idle audience did not know the details of her and Huang Song having supper and talking about the alliance. When they first arrived in the streaming room that day, they were shocked by the development of the story. Many of them even expressed doubt and worry about it. Xiaopen, streamer, you broke the agreement and pretended to be an official, right? Can you guarantee that Huang Song's descendants will not secretly stir up trouble? In ancient novels, the character of Huang Song's descendants was the proper male lead. The ancestors and the royal family failed to fight for the world. In order to appease the people, the royal family pretended to be benevolent and righteous. The descendants had no choice but to yield to reality. In the male lead's generation, he was the most outstanding existence. He was even envied and hated by the cruel and tyrannical emperor. He was always on guard against suppressing the male lead. The male and female protagonists fell in love while laying low, conserving their strength. After a series of struggles, they overthrew the royal family and replaced them. The audience was tired of watching this kind of plot and couldn't help but worry that Huang Song's descendants would make trouble. It was better to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. Goo 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 goo. Although it's not good to kill the innocent, you have to think about yourself and your descendants. It's dangerous to keep Huang Song alive. Cafeteria Dafinanti, it's very serious to swear an oath with blood. Both parties will not break the contract easily, let alone sign a paper contract. For a more recent example, during the Long March, a certain marshal also used the method of blood oath to make an agreement with the ethnic minorities not to offend each other. Although ancient times were backward in all aspects, their spirit of contract was very worthy of praise. If it was just a verbal agreement, they would have to rely on their own morals to fulfill the agreement. Naturally, there would be more people who would break the agreement. However, Jiang Pengji put all the terms into practice. While they pledged their alliance by drinking blood, there was an additional procedure to sign the alliance contract. It was written in black and white, and the alliance was the proof. Who would take the initiative to break the agreement? Han Yu and Cheng Jing, as the MCs of both parties, checked the two agreements separately to make sure that there was no difference between the content of the alliance contract and the agreed terms. After the check, Han Yu read it aloud to let the officials and soldiers who witnessed the alliance contract know what was written in it. If there are no objections, you and I will sign it. Huang Song sighed. Of course not. He picked up the pen and dipped it in red ink. He signed his name at the end of the agreement and stamped it with his private seal. That was not enough. They also needed to leave their handprints on the agreement. Jiang Pengji pulled out a dagger and cut her palm with a poker face. She clenched her fist and blood covered her entire palm. Huang Song saw that she was so bold, so he silently gave up the delicate action of using the ink pad. But he had no sharp weapon with him, so he could only borrow her dagger. There were two copies of the alliance contract. One was kept by Jiang Pengji and the other by Huang Song. Jiang Pengji dipped her finger in the bowl filled with animal blood and wiped the blood on her lips. Huang Song did the same. She said happily, "The alliance contract has been signed. It seems that it is not impossible for us to have dinner together when we are 60 years old." Huang Song thought that he had a long life, but the person in front of him might not. However, if he dared to say that out loud, the people behind Jiang Pingji would definitely beat him to death. Under the supervision of his desire to live, Huang Song could only swallow the words in his heart silently. The alliance contract was signed, but it was not over so easily. Huang Song couldn't help but sigh when he thought of Qing Jing and the others. He had failed to live up to their high hopes and expectations. My lord, why did it have to be like this? Yuan Chang's wounds were treated, but because of his action, the gauze was stained with blood again. He didn't care about it at all and continued, "It was all because of my incompetence that I failed to protect my lord, so my lord..." Thinking of his lord's experience, Yuan Chong was so sad that his eyes turned red. If it wasn't for his incompetence, how could his lord fall into the hands of Lu Shi? Huang Song hurriedly interrupted Yuan Chong and raised his hand to help him up. There were many generals in the Yuan family. Although each of them had their own thoughts, there was no lack of sincere and loyal people. Huang Song only felt that he owed Yuan Chong, but Yuan Chong did not owe him. "Heng Shu, why do you say that?" Huang Song laughed bitterly. The more Yuan Chong behaved this way, the more he felt guilty and sad. As his lord, he owed everyone too much. He was afraid that he could not repay them in this lifetime. After much persuasion, Yuan Chong was finally appeased, but the sorrowful atmosphere only increased. Everyone looked as if they had lost their parents. Huang Song and Feng Ju looked at each other from a distance. The latter's expression was gloomy and cold. "Has my lord thought about what to do in the future?" One of the strategists asked Huang Song. His voice was a little hoarse. Huang Song said, "Lanting is a person who keeps her promises. Since she swore an oath with blood, she won't break it easily. I'm not worried about myself. Instead, I'm more worried about you. You're all in the prime of your lives. You can't just retire and waste your talents, can you?" For an ambitious person, wasting time was the cruelest punishment. Huang Song was not a sore loser. He did not mind the old officials pledging allegiance to Jiang Pingji. As the saying went, parents could remarry, not to mention the ruler and the officials. When everyone heard this, they felt even sadder. Some people even burst into tears. Huang Song was not completely selfless. He had his own plans. Because the covenant stipulated that the male heirs of the third generation of Huang Song were not allowed to become officials, he could only think of ways to train his daughter. If the old officials pledged allegiance to Jiang Pingji, they would be his daughter's natural support in the court in the future. Huang Song's childhood experience told him that reputation and everything else were fake. Only strength could earn people's respect. Jiang Pingji would grant him a title of nobility for 3 generations in the future, but it was an empty title without power. If others were willing to respect you, it meant that they thought highly of you. If they were not willing to respect you, you could only accept it. As the head of the family, Huang Song naturally could not let his family face such a predicament. Therefore, he had to plan slowly now. Chapter 1341. Cheng Jing was not the only one under Huang Song who was unwilling to surrender. Jiang Pingji would not mind anything but having more people she could use. Huang Song's old officials were unwilling to surrender. She would suffer a great loss. This plan was not only to pave the way for her future daughter, but also to let Huang Song persuade these people to surrender. It was not difficult to persuade others to surrender. The only difficulty was Qing Jing and Feng Ju. Needless to say, there were only 2 reasons why Qing Jing was unwilling to surrender. First, the time was not ripe. Second, Jiang Pingji's Langya County was too powerful. If he was included, Yuan Jing would have 3 of his 4 disciples. He did not want to cause trouble for his teacher and junior brothers. Even if Jiang Pingji was not a person who liked to be suspicious, it was difficult to guarantee that others would not feel a sense of crisis. If Wei Ci were here, he would also agree with Qing Jing's idea. Wasn't Wei Ci like that in his previous life? Even if he had no intention of rebelling, even if his original intention of supporting the descendants of the Wei family was for Her Majesty, the Wei family's restlessness aroused the suspicion and vigilance of Qiguan Rang and the others. Once the meteorite fell from the sky, Wei Si almost lost his life. The Wei family was also completely suppressed. Even if they were in the same power, there would be discordant voices within. If one faction's influence was allowed to expand, the other factions would naturally feel a sense of crisis and urgency. This was also the beginning of internal discord. People always had selfishness and preferences. It was not that there were no people who truly served the public wholeheartedly without distractions, but there were too few. Even these people were not absolutely obedient. They would loyally eradicate what they thought was a threat. Cheng Jing tactfully expressed his worries. Naturally, Huang Song could not force him. Then, why was Feng Ju unwilling to surrender? In the face of Huang Song's tactful inquiry, Feng Ju was silent for a long time. He said faintly, "There's no other reason. I'm tired of it." Feng Ju said it lightly, but Huang Song felt that he had another meaning. However, Feng Ju was unwilling to say it clearly, so Huang Song could not force him. He sighed. "If you're tired of it, you can become a hermit and live a carefree life." No matter what, Feng Ju was the third Langjun of the Feng family. As long as he did not deliberately seek death, Jiang Pingji would not touch him for Feng Jin's sake. From this point of view, Feng Ju was the safest among them. He could advance and retreat at will, so Huang Song did not have to worry too much. He and Feng Ju had known each other since they were young, so he had slowly come to understand the other's character. Feng Ju might look easygoing on the outside, but in reality he was extremely arrogant. This kind of arrogance did not mean that he was arrogant. Instead, it was the way he handled things. Because Feng Ju learned and did everything easily, he gradually developed a personality that could not tolerate failure. Feng Ju had suffered quite a blow from this huge defeat. Huang Song also hoped that he could calm down for some time. Feng Ju said, "Has my lord really given up?" Huang Song was stunned, and he suddenly recalled the conversation between the two of them all those years ago. "What if I lose? If the Lord loses, I will accompany the Lord to fight the Azura Hell again. There won't be another Lu Lanting there." When he thought of this, Huang Song's face suddenly flushed red, and he was almost too embarrassed to show his face. Feng Ju was not a person who cherished his life. He did not care about the lives of others, nor did he care about his own life. In the end, however, Huang Song signed an alliance with Jiang Pingji. He paid the price of not being able to become an official for 3 generations. He sacrificed his freedom in exchange for a night of promiscuity. Feng Ju must be very disappointed at this moment, right? Huang Song was not a person who was afraid of death, but he could not open his mouth to defend himself. Similarly, he could not explain his current actions. "Huaijia," Huang Song spoke embarrassedly. He did not dare to meet Feng Ju's eyes at all. Feng Ju asked again, "Has my lord really given up?" This time, his tone was more serious than before. "Huaijia, it's not that I've completely given up, but is there a need to continue fighting in this situation? The winner is king, and the loser is the bandit. A loss is a loss. I, Huang Bogeo, am not a person who cannot afford to lose," Huang Song said awkwardly. "You and I have known each other for many years. How can you not know my ambition? If Lu Lanting can really pacify the world and end this chaotic world, so what if I submit to her?" If it were not for the fact that he was in a dead end, Huang Song would not have admitted defeat so easily. However, the outcome had been decided, and he did not want to fight anymore. Hearing this, Feng Ju's eyes darkened, and there was another period of silence. After a while, he said, "In the end, it's all my fault." Huang Song was dumbfounded. He thought that Feng Ju would reprimand him, but he did not expect the topic to change and put the blame on him. What did this mean? Feng Ju refused to explain. That year, the Dongxing royal family moved the capital to Qinzhou, and Huang Song had a stage to show his skills. Although it was Yang Si who schemed against Huang Song and caused him to lose the trust of the Dongxing emperor, Feng Ju also added fuel to the fire. Huang Song's ambition could be said to have been raised by Feng Ju. He only cared about himself and forgot what Huang Song's original goal was. Feng Ju did not give Huang Song a chance to ask. He bowed and said, "I have made up my mind." "My lord, please take care of yourself in the future." Huang Song could not tell what he was feeling in his heart. He only felt powerless and sad. His movements quickly reached Jiang Pingji's ears. She also knew the choices of the people. Those who were willing to submit, she would only accept them after an assessment. Those who were not willing to submit. Cheng Jing and Feng Zhu really don't know what's good for them, a general muttered in a low voice, feeling indignant for Jiang Pingji. As soon as he finished speaking, he was glared at by a few people. He was so scared that he did not dare to make a sound. The people who glared at him were not bystanders. They were Wei Ci, Yang Si, and Han Yu. They were the big shots of the advisors. How could the newly promoted small general dare to offend them? The three of them were considered Qing Jing's senior and junior brothers. Feng Zhu was Feng Jin's third brother. It was not easy to deal with any of them. Jiang Pingji rubbed her brows and said, "Leave Qing Jing to Master Yuan Jing. Feng Zhu will return a favor to the Feng family." She was responsible for the children she had taught. Jiang Pingji did not want to kill the two boys and offend Yuan Jing and Feng Ren. After all, she still needed them to help her perfect her education. As long as Qing Jing and Feng Zhu did not betray her, Jiang Pingji could let them go. Anyway, Qing Jing had gone to Yuan Jing's side. It was impossible for him to be idle. When Feng Zhu returned to the Feng family would keep an eye on him and not cause trouble for her. Everyone said, "My lord is benevolent." The counselor could still find out what she was thinking. If others were a little slower, they would almost put her on the pedestal of benevolence. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Look, it was obvious that she was full of evil tricks. She was scheming from afar, but outsiders still thought that she was pure and righteous. She did not care about Huang Song's matters for now. Jiang Pingji was extremely busy. Previously, Huang Song's army was defeated. There were countless casualties, but there were even more deserters. If she left them alone, they would either starve to death or become bandits and harm the people. Jiang Pingji naturally had to deal with the aftermath. On one hand, she sent troops to capture them. On the other hand, she recruited troops and horses to trick them into coming back. Jiang Pingji had the most experience in dealing with these defeated troops. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.